Live. This hangout is on air. I think that means that we are live. Hello, welcome to the Demotivator Opinion channel. I am your host, Demotivator Opinion, and here we are having a hangout with way too many people, as is the norm on this website.
So natural.
Normally Christy hosts these kind of things, so this is very weird for me. But today we are going to talk about just some YouTube things that have been going on. Particularly the stream with Andy Warsky and Richard Spencer.
Tim, can I just ask, why have you turned into a robot newsreader?
Because I don't know what the fuck you're supposed to do when you're introducing this kind of thing. So you just talk like this, right? Like
you're doing right. You open it up, you give a little summary of it, then you go through the guest list, and then you start with the first question. You're doing fine, Tim. You're doing great.
Well, just a short summary. We're going to talk about the alt-right, Richard Spencer, this is Sargon, blah, blah, blah. And then we've taken a bunch of notes, and we're going to go through our notes and the hangout and just give general impressions, have some discussion, and I'll try to move it along. But I'm not very good at that, so just if it goes off the rails, you've been warned. So who we've got here? We have got Chrisiosity and Foxy Jezebel and Kevin Logan and Christy Winters and Michael, the king of the internet, or whatever the fuck you wanted me to call it. I can't remember.
Yeah.
What was it? The bard of the left or something?
The official bard of the left.
Okay, I forgot what I was meant to call you. Rin and an actual joke. So I will link all of those people down below. Everybody say hi at once.
Hi.
Hi.
Just like a cacophony of highs.
Hi.
Okay, so the first notes that we're taking were for 0 to 30 minutes, and I took a whole lot of notes on that. And where the fuck are the notes? I knew this was going to happen. So,
can we sack Tim as host? I'm leaving a mutiny already.
I can't fucking do this shit, man. So
You're doing fine. Don't let Kevin break your psychological strength.
So just on the first 0 to 30 minutes of the conversation between Spencer and Sargon, Spencer was summing up his career and his life, and his first point was that conservatives are wrong about free markets because they're too liberal. The starting point of the alt-right is identity or identitarianism. It's about who am I? Who are we? What's my extended family? The conservative, and I didn't quite understand what he meant by this, the conservative movement floated leftwards, and capitalism enabled the Iraq War, which is curious. I don't know how that quite makes sense. Conservatives want to conserve, and the left is fundamentally individualistic, not the right. And so he just went on sort of a big spiel. He said he's not a libertarian. Libertarianism is kind of masked conservatism. They're anti-government. And then I just wrote here word salad, because honestly, I wasn't quite sure what he was talking about. And then Sticks introduced himself. He said he's basically a libertarian. He agrees that there are like dynastic systems and issues. Spencer cares about the erosion of the white family and the nuclear family, but he cares about the growth of government, especially bad government. The far left cares about corporations. The problem is that people are being abused. There's a particular group destroying society, but Sticks says the government is destroying society. So then he says people just yell at Spencer and say fuck him because they can't refute him or something. And okay, and then he says he's a pagan, but he doesn't like labels, and people, when he uses labels about himself like pagan, that people dishonest about him and lie about him. Then Sargon did his intro. Sorry, this is a bit of a monologue, but we are going to talk about it. Sargon intro, he said, I'm an English liberal. I'm for enlightenment, individualistic liberalism. Liberalism still means liberal in England, not progressivism. And he rejects identitarianism. And then they got into this whole conversation about group rights. And JF said groups agree to binding contracts, and he recognizes that. And then Sargon is like, so you believe in group rights? And then Sargon says, I'm not in a binding contract with a group because the group has no power over me. And then I wrote, ha ha ha, I'm so smart. I added that bit. But basically, okay, the whole conversation gets into group rights versus individual rights, and then Spencer mocked Sargon talking about Locke because he was like Locke, started the social contract, which was the foundation of society, and Spencer mocked Locke and those ideas as irrelevant. Yeah. So that's our starting point. Just that spiel I went on. Any thoughts,
What
Ronald?
can I just say? The idea that the group doesn't have any control of you. I'd like Sargon to go out and commit a heinous crime and then see whether he gets locked up in a fucking cage for a very long time because the group has power over him. It's a ridiculous notion. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. Well, then Spencer went into like a society as a group, and a group has rights, and you don't understand what's going on. They started calling each other autistic and stuff. Spencer said "lived reality" 5 million times. Anyone have a comment on this whole group rights versus individual rights conversation?
One of the things that I think characterizes their two positions is that Sargon overemphasizes individual rights at the expense of group interests and group rights. And Spencer wants to put the group, in this case defined by their race, quote unquote, as the thing that should be the connecting principle for every individual. And so to watch them debate, it would have been interesting if they actually would have gotten more into the principles of the individualist. And one of the things that Sargon does in his talks is he'll talk about the state versus the individual and individual versus groups. He doesn't spend a lot of time talking about how to reconcile the conflicts of rights between individuals. That's something that he doesn't do. And of course, there's a big problem with overgeneralizing membership in a group based on something as random as a biological connection that Spencer wants to treat as a cultural, social, normative value, in my opinion, that somehow connects people. But the gap between those connections and the biologies just aren't there. He's trying to put connections where none exist.
Hmm. Yep.
Apparently you're quite quiet, Christy, if you want to turn yourself up or something.
Okay, I'll try to move my mic up, but thanks. Tim can actually turn my volume up a bit.
I can do that? Oh my god, the power.
Yeah.
So how about some folks like Chrissy, Foxy, Ren? Any thoughts on this whole group rights versus individual rights conversation that we're having? And Sargon is like, the individual is the most important thing, and that is the thing that we should always have in mind at all times. And I mean, my issue with that is not that that's a bad thought. It's just that he seems to say that to the total detriment of the idea that a group could ever have precedence in any way. And obviously it can. I mean, even like in a war, for example, that's putting the just existence or the idea of a state or a country or a group of people, because there's an existential threat, above the idea of the individual. So individuals get sucked into a war and they get killed. So
isn't it true that Carl would have been nothing without the group? I mean, he's got an audience, doesn't he? Isn't that a group?
Well, he'd be currently living in the Third Reich right now if it wasn't for the group. So.
Also, to kind of define collectivism here, which is more of a set of principles that say, if you have, it's kind of, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's collectivism. We all have to sacrifice something for a society that we can all enjoy. Whereas the individualist would say, no, my rights are being infringed upon, and you're limiting my liberty and my enjoyment of life because I'm being infringed upon. So the collective doesn't mean, so collectivism is not collective. One's an ideology, the other one's a noun, and it's not like the group per se. So if anyone else wants to come in on who might understand, do a specialty in collectivism, but that's my understanding of it.
Okay, so essentially, what Carl thinks is that there can't be an individual rights and collective rights, or individualism and collectivism at the same time. There are many philosophies that have an approach to both. For example, from my knowledge, there's something called egoism, which is sort of a individualist first and then collective second idea. But there's individualist methods that can be concern for yourself, then concern for the group, rather than just simply concern for myself, no one else matters. That really comes from a sort of staunch neoliberal capitalist idea. That's how that comes across. It's very clear that Sargon is just a staunch capitalist, and he doesn't really care about other people because he's so focused on himself with his individual rights.
How about folks I haven't heard from so far, like Ren, Jazzy, and Chrissy? Any thoughts?
Well, I think Sonia pretty much summed it up. Like and everyone else pretty much sums it up. Sargon really seems to get off on this idea of taking like rugged individualism to the max. And without any consideration of like, there is a point where you as an individual sort of ends, and when dynamics of a group begin, and I think it's also his way of getting out of any accountability for, let's say, if he's part of a group that does something horrible, or if he is in a group that, if you get into any race conversation with him, it's sort of him bringing up being an individual, and individualism is sort of his go-to way of trying to get out of any sort of accountability for, being in a group that's on top of some sort of that's been on top of a social hierarchy for a long time, and that's sort of his go-to defense mechanism. Richard Spencer, the sad thing about this is that I think Richard Spencer probably has a better idea on civics. Individualism. Yeah, he probably has a better idea on head around civics than Sargon does, which kind of makes me sad to say, because
well, yeah, it's
you never want to give points to the worser of two evils in a conversation, but sadly it was obvious that one person sort of kind of knew a bit more.
Well, I found it a little bit irritating, because the conversation so early just got bogged down in Richard Spencer being super arrogant and condescending about basic civics, because Sargon has, I think, these very particular ideas about how everything works, and if people don't agree with his particular ideas or pass them out or try to analyze them, he gets super defensive, like, that's not how it works. It doesn't work like that. It works like this. It works like the way that I read about it and the way that I think about it. That's how it works. And that kind of derailed the conversation very early on. Just, Spencer being like, do you pay taxes? Do you think that like your country can ever come before an individual in any circumstance, in any individual particular situation? And Sargon just floundering around like,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, God.
Exactly. And it also, it brings me back to that, that conversation that I think Thomas Smith or Atheist had with the organizers of Mythicist Milwaukee, and one of the organizers saying that Sargon was an intellectual. I was like, oh my God, are you serious? Have you ever listened to this man debate?
Right.
So it just brings it home that, like, oh God.
Yeah, that's a point I actually made, is that it wasn't so embarrassing for him when he lost to Christie, because Christie is an intellectual, an academic who knows what the fuck she's talking about. And
she's a powerhouse.
Whereas Richard Spencer's a fucking tool who doesn't really know what he's talking about, and yet he still managed to school Sargon on some very, very basic civics.
Yeah, Richard Spencer basically knows enough, because he, to my knowledge, as far as I know, he did like receive some higher education, but then he dropped out, right?
He was, I'm sorry, he was on par to be a PhD from Duke. So he was, and he says basically that he dropped out to be a white supremacist, to think thought crimes, as he puts it.
So he went from being a blue devil, to being a white devil.
I think it's important to mention this in one of the MOA's videos, which is excellent channel. You should check it out. He mentions the fact that Richard Spencer had used the works of Kevin MacDonald to try and write his master's thesis on about how the Jewish conspiracy runs the world.
It's a good
Yeah,
topic.
I mean, you have to understand. I have a boring amount of information on Richard Spencer because I practice know your enemy. So he considers Carl Schmitt his number one, the person who influenced him the most in terms of his political philosophy.
Oh.
And Carl Schmitt is the Nazi who burned all the Jewish books and taught, and he was the one that sort of, he was a legal scholar, and he was talking about how Hitler was okay with killing people. It was okay that Hitler killed people because his basic theory is that liberalist democracies are too slow and they can't handle emergencies well, and it's better to have sort of a strong dictatorial leadership in place to do that instead. So, I mean, that's not a very good, because Carl Schmitt was a smart guy. It's a very complicated theory, so that's not a good way of putting it, but that's sort of the basic gist of what he said.
Well, I think
It doesn't really matter how smart you are if you think that Hitler was a good guy.
Yeah, but I think that's actually a really interesting example you give. The idea that he takes his cues from a notorious book burner, because one of the things that comes up later on in the actual discussion, and I'm not sure which half hour and whose half hour it is, but it'll come up. The idea that he's essentially very pro-censorship, which he doesn't like to usually. They usually like to do the we're for free speech thing. We basically said, in the ethno-state there will be, censure for dissenting opinion.
Yeah, which
He's
was
a
actually
fascist.
that was actually pretty surprising. I was like, wow, he understand. It's like he not only does he understand sort of the concepts that come, like he's not a free speech absolutist like these other morons are, but he's also willing to take it to the next level. Like, yes, I understand that there are limits to quote free speech, and not only that, like some people's speech actually should be censored.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, Ren, go.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, like when it comes to the alt-rights, they seem to enjoy co-opting the anti-feminists. Like the anti-feminists would say, we are for free speech. And then the alt-rights who don't really care about free speech would go, we're for free speech to just get more people into their group, because you kind of notice that they kind of talk the same. Like, that you can watch early anti-feminist videos where they would use words like degenerates. You can hear the alt-right say degenerates. You can hear anti-feminists say words like quotes cuck and quotes faggots. We can also hear the alt-rights saying the exact same things, so it's kind of like they rather talk a bit of alike, so it's kind of like sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the two parts on Twitter.
Yeah, like in terms of their vernacular and how they talk, like when Spencer was like, "You are living in an autistic existence" to Sargon, and he's like, "This is so autistic. What you're saying is really autistic." And then about half an hour later into the debate, Sargon himself was like, "What you're saying is autistic," and I was like, "Well, they both talk like that. It's like they both share this vernacular and this rhetoric that sprang up around anti-feminism, like." Oh, everybody's triggered. Like, do you want your safe space? You're autistic, or
he in his infamous "fuck you, Bernie" table punching scene, he goes on to describe Bernie Sanders.
That's good.
Yeah, everyone, I think probably most people have seen it. He later goes on to describe Bernie Sanders as a cuck. Now, I'm sorry if you share so many of the same ideas and the same way of expressing them, then I'm sorry, you're not really that much of an opponent, are you?
Not really. Anyway, so moving on just from my notes. So Sargon did say something really weird, but I would have to get him to expand on that or hear more what he has to say about that. Sargon said, "A corporation does not have the the legitimacy to violate an individual's rights. And when I heard that, I was like, what the fuck? Like, I think he's talking about, because he's all about his principles, all about the principles. The principle of the thing is that there's no contract or there's no like right of a corporation to violate your rights. But I think like that's not dealing with the reality of how corporations work. Like recently, I don't know if anyone's heard about it, but the life insurance company FLAC has been getting in a ton of trouble because of the way that they treat their employees, and they give them a whole bunch of false promises, and they promise their employees that they can go to this like next tier where they get higher pay and get to the next level in the corporation. However, the way that they've set it up is that so that only like something like 4% of employees ever get to that point, and the rest of them are on this kind of like ad hoc contract where they're not seen as a real employee, so that if they ever have issues about how things are going with the corporation, they have no rights and they can't do a single thing about it because of they've been snookered. I don't know, I put an H on that. Snookered into a particular relationship with the company that they can't do shit about. So they take it to a court and it gets thrown out. And then you could just say, well, they knew signing up with this company that they'd be completely fucked over. But that's not the case. Like companies and corporations take people for a ride constantly. And it's really weird to hear Sargon just put it on a principle level. Like in principle, they can't violate your rights. Therefore, what? Like, what does that mean?
He has.
Well, no, I think we have to remember that this is actually shitlordism. So you have to read it through the lens of a shitlord. What he means there is Twitter can't ban him. That's what
Twitter did ban him. So.
I mean, but in a way, it's like it's basically how all these folks operate. They operate on the principle, like just like with the whole, with the ordeal with the gerrymandering laws in North Carolina, and how folks were how the skeptics were like, voter ID laws in within the words do not discriminate against Black people and stuff like that, and it's like
there are no laws on books that oppress.
In principle, they don't do that. It's like, of course, in principle, they're not going to outright. No one's going to fucking outright say right in a law, like we're redrawing these districts to make sure that the darkies can't vote us out of office, like that. You're never going to find anyone put that shit in writing.
Well, that's the issue when you deal with everything in terms of abstract ideas. And the funny thing is, Spencer said a lot like, lived reality is this, lived reality is that, and slightly further in my notes, and he's like, you're not living in the real world, Sargon. Like, Sargon, you're not tethered to reality. That's not how things work. But then slightly later,
it's like, damn it, why Richard Spencer? Why are you making more sense than this motherfucker? It's like, no.
Slightly later in my notes, he says the ethnostate is an ideal which does not exist right now. It's something we're striving for. It's something that we're going for. And I was like, so much for lived reality. Like, you're not talking about lived reality anymore. Now you're talking about your fantastical Dungeons and Dragons fucking ethnostate. So
yeah,
Spencer doesn't have a leg to stand on talking about practicality and reality, because his entire
pretty much
thing is just about this fantastical, magical future, which. It doesn't fucking make sense, and everyone's like, this will lead to bloodshed and oppression and horror, and it will be a disaster, and your country will be, like, as Trump would say, a shithole. But you don't care about that. You just care about, like, I am going to talk about pragmatism and lived reality when I'm, fighting against Sargon, and then we're going to spend the rest of the conversation talking about, is this person allowed in the ethnostate? Is that person? What chunk of land will we use for the ethnostate? Are these people white? It's ridiculous.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
I was just going to say, my half hour is basically up. I think at the end he says that Spencer says there's a core stock to the white race, which is something we talked about offline. But and then
that actually bleeds into. I think that bleeds into the half an hour that Christy and I were forced to look at, and it's like, oh god.
But I think maybe I should move the conversation along because it's been on me too long. So the next bit is Christy Winters and Jazzy. You had half an hour to an hour on this bit, and sorry, I took too long on that first part. So maybe try to speed it up a bit. My notes were like way too in depth. Like I just took down everything. So
if people had joined,
it's really okay, because it's sort of what happens when actual skeptical folks have to have these conversations debunking bullshit. And it's like for every minute of bullshit we hear, we have to spend about 2 to 5 minutes breaking down why it's bullshit.
I know, so it takes too long. It's
so long. That's why for us who are more liberal and more on the left, that's why it takes us so long, because we end up spending so much time on how much of this stuff is bullshit, and that's sort of where we've been. So yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So Christy, you want to start this off? Cause yeah.
I'm sorry, Kevin had a comment. What was that?
Well, I was just going to say, if people had joined my mutiny, we could have overthrown Tim's maniacal rule.
Put me in charge again.
Yeah.
And put the queen on the throne back where she belongs.
We can start a Kevno
Right.
state.
Hey,
Christianity.
Hey.
Okay, so over to Christy.
I'm still thinking about Dungeons and Dragons ethno states.
Jesse.
So what I thought, Jazzy, is that I'll just go over my vague notes, and then if you want to take any of these points and flesh them out a little bit or comment on them, and then we can maybe open it up for the group to react, or we can pick certain ones of these. But in the 30-minute section I pretty much focused on Sargon and Spencer because they were the main people in the debate, although Styx makes a point that I note here. So as I said before, two things. The hyper-individualism of Sargon contrasted with Spencer's collective identity, hyper-collective identity. The next thing I also wanted to say was the way that Sargon used abstract notions, whereas Spencer is always trying to sort of appeal to emotion or, make it like, to lived experience, which was an interesting dichotomy. And then they also had a complete inability to agree to terms and use definitions. So sorry, I'll stop there because I've got a few more points, but your reactions to those.
Oh, I definitely agree. Like I said, this hyper individualism that Sargon sort of subscribes to was definitely a contrast towards Richard Spencer's idea of collectivism, like as a group, as one of a group and as an identity. And I think it also, again, I hate giving this asshole points over another asshole.
Yeah.
But again, he seems to have, in some ways, he demonstrates a bigger understanding between individualism and collectivism, and understands that they can sort of both exist at the same time. But then again, he sounds more pragmatic, but then we'll go off into, later into like, trying to, explain this ideal of a white ethno state that it could happen somehow without bloodshed and violence and, and suffering and stuff like that. But anyway, noted that too. Other things that I noted, let me go to where I know. Yeah.
I know. I actually I lost my notes. I have to find them again.
Yeah. See, there were observations that I had, which Tim left off of the whole white stock thing, like how Richard Spencer said that there's a core white stock, and when people start using terms like, like stock, it automatically takes me to things like, is he going to say, white breeds next time? Mm-hmm. So, but I made sure that there was, I looked online to see if, the many definitions for stock. And of course I found that that it also means it can also be used to mean ancestry or lineage, but use of that word when it comes to humans sort of really rubs me the wrong way, because, when I hear that, then like I said, I always, it's like I'm waiting for someone to say, oh, breeds and stuff like that. And then that's when we can really start getting into debunking race realism, because
but they say, subspecies is one of the big things too.
Yes, but they want to say that their subspecies are a thing with humans, even though the consensus of biologists is that not a subspecies, but they always want to bring it there. And they want to say that there are different types of breeds, meanwhile not understanding that breeds is an artificial thing. That's sort of when we decide, that an animal, we decide what sort of traits for a type of animal that we want will be helpful for the animal that we want. And we control the mating of certain animals to get so that the likelihood of the animal we want having the certain traits that we want is possible. So that's totally artificial. There's nothing natural. There's nothing really natural about it.
Ironically, that's actually what they want to do. They want to essentially ban what they call miscegenation, the idea of any kind of mixed child being born. So ironically, they do want to create humans with specific.
That's pretty much what they want to do. They feel that they think, oh well, it's natural that the races should be separate, but it's God. But the whole thing with stocks also makes me wonder, what would DNA testing be required in their ethnostate or something?
Oh, well. It's perfect. You're going to segue into my next point.
Oh, because Sargon brought that up, yeah.
Yes, that's right. So Sargon, well, this is, sorry to interrupt, but it actually feeds into it.
Oh, no, go ahead. I want you to back to you.
Yeah.
Go.
One of the problems with Andrew's moderation was that he wasn't sort of separating the two guys. They were verbally, slap fighting each other. And so it was very difficult for any of them to make a point or in a constructive sort of coherent way, from start to finish. So if you listen to the full 30 minutes, what I think Sargon's point is that if you have a situation where you say whiteness is tied to DNA, then in order to establish how white you are, you would have a DNA test as a requirement to be a citizen of the ethno-state, and that this then leads to the inevitable purity spiral of who is white and how to get things whiter. And so, yeah, that's not actually the argument. Had Sargon made that would have been a lot more eloquent, but he didn't. He sort of stuttered through all three pieces of that logic over 30 minutes.
Yeah, and it's like he had something. He could have rolled with it if he were smarter, but sadly he's not. And he could have used that to really, if he wanted, if he knew better, he could have used that to sort of bring the argument home on, the definition of, like with Richard Spencer and let's say Millennial Woes, that their definition of race is strictly to related to skin color. Like that's it. Mm-hmm. Not based on anything factual. It's based on just how a person looks, and how their idea of an ethno-state really wouldn't be able to work out, because, and especially, given that you can even look at American history and look through the history of Black Americans who, due to miscegenation, quote unquote, ended up being able to pass for white. And then that's why he started coming up with these rules, looking back in people's recent histories. So if you're white passing, you could fully pass for white, but if they find out that there's a Black person in your family, then they would put you down as Black on whatever census method they had. So he could have led back to the truth that Spencer's concept of whiteness isn't really based on anything factual or biological.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Michael.
Sure, Mike.
Just on this idea, the fact that it's all bullshit. There's no actual science behind it. Say that they actually went ahead with the ethno-state or whatever, in some, they had the means to be able to do this. Wouldn't it just fail because they aren't actually able to do the thing that they say they want to do, because there's no actual way, because it's just based on skin color? There's no actual scientific method for.
We're going to come on to that.
Finding. Yeah.
Exactly. There's no scientific way because like 99.99% of us, we all share the same DNA. We all share the same characteristics. So there's really no way to find out who's like a pure white biologically. And even this idea of a core white stock that Richard is talking about, like when he said Nordics and people like that, they only constitute as white because the dominant society came to a consensus on sooner or later to consider like not. So again, it's not based on anything biological. It's pretty much social.
And so I suppose that's why they need he talks about a.
So I was just going to say, what exposes that perfectly is that it's obviously not just, or not at all, a biological thing. Is that he was specifically asked, what about white Muslims? Would white Muslims be allowed into the ethno state? And he said, definitely not. And that's got nothing to do with
there's a religious test as well. Yeah.
Someone said white Muslims. I think even Sticks said, "Oh, well, what about the Jews?"
So Ren was going to get a comment in.
I was going to say. Yeah, like Foxy brought up, like, if you have like a black grandfather, then you wouldn't be considered, white. And it just reminds me of something interesting that V posted on Twitter, where Tara McCarthy and Alternative Hypothesis are saying that Sargon doesn't really have a black grandfather and that they think Sargon is really white, and they're asking for Sargon to give them a DNA test so that they can see if Sargon.
Wait, did they actually say that?
Oh my God! If they actually said that, they are officially they're already pathetic. But that officially,
the goalposts are shifting. The dimensions of what's the important question is shifting fluidly with the alt-right. So it's always shifting so much you can't pin it down in one place. It moves to skin color, it moves to cultural whiteness, or it moves to the DNA. It
moves to whatever they need it to be.
The definition, that's the thing, that's how you catch them. The definition for whiteness always moves. They'll be like, oh, well, we define race as, with a couple of things, with this and this and that. And I guess it could include skin color and physical features, but it also comprises these other things too. And it's like, thanks for clearing that up for me.
The chat me and Kevin were in with Mike Enoch, that took an interesting turn when he was like, everybody knows what white is. This is irrelevant. I'm sick of this fucking question. I'm so tired of talking about what's white. We all know what's fucking white. And I was like, geez, chill, dude. Obviously you can't deal with this fucking question. So, he can't deal with this thing, which is, it's a white ethno state. How is it not?
That reminds me, didn't Millennial Woes also in the talk? Didn't Millennial Woes also lose his shit about so would you consider Lawrence Fishburne white or something like that? He asked the question.
Yeah, that was his argument.
And it's like, okay, thank you for showing me that your definition of white is based on the social construct of whiteness. It's not based on anything biological. It's based on how a person looks.
And not just that, but it's obviously a bullshit fallacious example he's giving, because no one would question whether Lawrence Fishburne was white or whether, I can't remember the exact actress, a white actress, and asked if she was black. Because no one's arguing that there aren't people Uma Thurman. But it's the peripheries. It's where does that stop? If you've got, there are lots of people who are white. I'm white, but someone who would be darker than me might not necessarily, under whatever definition you might want to choose. And where do you stop? And that's the point. It's not saying that white people don't exist or that black people don't exist. It's that it's obviously blurred at the edges. And so the idea of your ethno-state is fucking bullshit.
Exactly.
If I might.
Well, you have to be... Sorry.
No, Christianity, you haven't spoken for a long time. You go.
So, the very idea, and the idea that we're even giving this sort of idea of this ethno-state the time of day is an enormous amount of charity, because it's a garbage, horrible idea, right? And it's evil and violent, and everything about it is, we should be so far past this now. Martin Luther King Day is tomorrow. I'm sorry. And we're and I get to talk about.
I don't think we're necessarily giving the idea, like the time of day, because it's in a way we have to. It's okay for us to poke fun at it, because just the fact that these folks were in a conversation giving such an insidious idea, the time of day. Like, if you just have to look at history. You just have to look at history. Just look at Germany, like, post World War I going into World War II, and how Hitler tried to make it into some pure ethno state, and how that worked out. You can, oh God. And, just the fact that anyone would argue that something like this can happen without there being bloodshed and violence and, misery for everyone involved. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, and just the fact that Richard Spencer thinks that this ideal is something worth going towards, and that somehow it could happen in America. Like, are you fucking kidding me? There is no way in hell you're getting anybody, whether they, emigrated over here, or whether they're like me, who are the descendants of folks who were brought over here against their will, centuries ago. There's no way in hell you're going to get me out of I've, settled down and made roots and made my home. There's no fucking way you're doing that to people without using force or violence. No way.
Just to address Chrisiosity's point there, I don't think it's a matter of generosity to take this on. It's that these things happen and continue to happen, and indeed are happening around the world. Genocide is a thing that consistently keeps on happening. And so if we can tackle it in a peaceful manner before it gets to the stage of being able to become an actual thing, I think that's better, isn't it? It's not a matter of giving generosity to it because it already happens. It's not like this is such an outlandish idea that it could never happen. So why not tackle it peacefully rather than let it develop, if that makes some sense?
Well, when I say it like that, what I mean is they should be... The fact that they're coming here and we're even mulling this over, don't even friggin' come and tell me about your white ethno state. If you don't know what white means, you can't define white. Your definition of white is look at Uma Thurman, look at Lawrence Fishburne. Yeah. That's fucking ridiculous. You're basing you're going to base the entire ethno state on something you don't know what the hell it is, because
it's something as complex as a state. Never mind even like an ethno state. Something as politically complex as putting together a state or a nation, and you're really going to place the onus of creating that on pretty much what someone looks like on the outside.
Well, I like the idea. I like the idea that they'd sell this ethno state and Lawrence Fishburne would turn up at the border. Like Lawrence Fishburne thinks he could get in or something, and he's trying to completely style it out at the border. That would be brilliant. I'd like the idea of that.
Yeah. Anyway,
I wouldn't because if he's surrounded by a bunch of hateful folks, he could wind up getting hurt or killed. So that's a no.
So what was your point, Rin?
Yeah, I don't know if you could see it or not, but I did find the tweets I was talking to you guys about earlier. And here is a screenshot from Tim McCarthy where it says, "We'd love to see your 23 and me. We're confused about how you and your parents look so white. Just talking about this with alternative hypothesis on Twitter. Not sure if you're over there." So they really are really obsessive over, are your grandparents white, or they really are very obsessive over it, where your average person wouldn't really care all that much.
No, very true. I think I wanted to leave this running the conversation a little bit, but I want to insert some information into this ethno-state whiteness discussion that might be helpful and take it in a slightly different direction. And that's to summarize, Styx talks about the problems. It was one thing when you wanted to have an ethno-state in like Europe, and you're in basically like creating it on tribal lines, or a place like Japan. But he pointed out that in a country like America, an ethno-state just simply wouldn't work without force. And then Richard Spencer picked up on that. And I think this is actually kind of an important point because I think the alt-right thinks this strengthens their argument when really it undermines it. Richard Spencer, I'm paraphrasing, said Americans could teach Europeans a lot about this notion of whiteness. And as we were talking about in the pre-show hangout.
Oh, sorry. Okay, hello. Did someone post the link in the chat? They did, right? Of the old video.
I don't know. But all I'll say is, as we saw at the start of part 1, if everyone had gone along with my mutiny idea, we wouldn't be having these fucking problems.
That's true. Well, I was just in the middle of talking, and all of a sudden it just said computer shutting down. And I was like, what the fuck? And then I just
your computer realizes how unpure you are.
That's probably the
well,
case.
This is the thing, right?
Yeah, your computer is a white identitarian that doesn't want you hanging around these brown people.
Son of a bitch.
The best argument I can think of as to why white people aren't superior would be this fucking stream.
And white people, no, I don't know.
What, Mr. Control?
So what were we on at the time?
Yeah. Previously on Tim's channel, LadyColumbia was going to describe the concept of whiteness and its construction in America and how that differs from Europe, because she did it when we were off air, and I want everyone to hear it.
Cool.
So one thing about the way that these people have constructed whiteness is whiteness in the United States is an invention of slavery, and it's an invention of the melange of different groups of white people in this country. So, initially you had English people, you had Scottish people, you had French people, you had German people all coming to this country, and they all mixed with each other. They all had children and whatnot. And over the generations, they lost that sort of cultural identity of identifying as English or as French. And so they became white people. In Europe, that's an entirely different notion. They are still divided by land masses. And so you have, if you'd asked a Frenchman in the 11th century, what do you identify as? Are you a white person? They would have looked at you crazy because that wasn't a thing. They would have said, well, I'm a Poitou man, or I'm an Aquitanian, or I'm from Maine, or I'm from Anjou, or I'm a Frank. There are cultural divisions within European countries that would disallow them from having an ethno-state. People in the north of England don't think of themselves as the same people as people in the south of England. People in Wales aren't the same thing as people in Scotland. So how do you propose to erase those centuries of what are effectively ethnic divisions to create an ethno-state?
I think that is some really great points. And, they do say things like people of the same race, like it gets along with each other. But, not many people know this, but like in Japan, people from like Osaka don't get along that well with people from Tokyo. There are divisions where people from Osaka don't really like the Tokyo people.
Yep, that's right.
And what happens when you put the Scots with the Welsh and the Welsh with the English and the English with the Irish and the Irish with the Irish? They all just going to kill each other.
They all get along perfectly, from what I've heard.
Yeah, that's going to be totally
fine. That's amazing. Yeah, that's why that's where this idea of ethnic nationalism fails. I think it's defined as. I defined it.
If you look at at Northern Ireland,
it's a form of basically to try to have this form of nationalism where you try to define a nation in terms of whatever you think an ethnicity is. It's really not going to work because of all the reasons that were mentioned by LadyColumbia. And again, white is a social construct that was created during the slave trade. It basically started out as a way to, classify who was different from whom by the colonists. And then it just evolved into this mechanism that's used to keep one group as dominant in a social hierarchy versus other groups.
Hold on, slow down. Hold on.
Right.
Wait 1 second. You're trying to tell me that white nationalism is racist and has come from racist ideas? Oh, geez.
Look, if you call it racist,
I'm sorry to break this to you, Michael Owens, but that's what it is.
Oh my God!
Alt-right 10 times more powerful by calling it racist. You have failed.
Yeah. Well then, oh my God.
Supposed another example of the supposed ethno-state is like supposedly Israel, despite Israel being 20% Arab. But ignoring that, they like to think that Israeli Jews are just all this cohesive hive mind who all work together, when like Ethiopian Jews are considered lesser, Mizrahi Jews are considered lesser, Ashkenazi Jews are considered like the top, like Sephardim are in the middle hierarchy of the ethnicities of Jews. Israel is not an ethno-state by any means.
Well, that's when Richard.
Yeah, basically, no country on any continent in the world is an ethno-state. I mean, right. Richard Spencer, and that's a point that Richard Spencer said that the United States wasn't, is an ethno-state or started out as an ethno-state, and it's like there were indigenous people here before colonists came over and started, killing the indigenous folks, giving them smallpox, enslaving them, all that stuff. So the United States was never an ethno-state.
But that's when Richard he switches to that cultural whiteness and Jewishness culture. Like they all share this Judaism, and it's kind of like a diaspora, and that's their nation that they go back to. So they all have this shared Jewish identity and trait or something, which means that no matter where a Jewish person is in the world, they are a Jew. That's this whole thing.
Right. Yeah, and all of these. Oh, go ahead, Ren. Go ahead.
Yeah, the funniest thing about watching, listening to Richard Spencer talk is that he kept naming things that aren't really ethno-states. It's like America is an ethno-state, Israel is an ethno-state, Poland is an ethno-state, Japan is an ethno-state. And it's like none of those things are actually ethno-states.
And I think Sargon pointed out that there is diversity in Israel, and he's like, that doesn't count, because in our magical ethno-state, there will be diversity.
Isn't that kind of just...
what?
Isn't that kind of just, it sort of just shows you how the guy thinks? I mean, like, because he, in the section that I looked at, right, he talks about Ghana a lot for some reason. But, like, if you look at Ghana, you can divide it into, like, 10, 15 different nationalities inside that country as a thing as well. So it's like, it's not... He seems to just look at everything as like a...
Yes.
Well,
and he seems to not know.
Sorry, I'm gonna push in. Sorry, is Ivanka Trump white? She converted Judaism, right?
Oh, they don't like Jared Kushner.
Now you're asking super salty questions because I don't know.
No, but they don't like Kushner and stuff because he is a bad influence on Trump because he's like putting Jewish ideas in his head or something.
But if you look at, I know, when they talk about, like Jews not being white, you live in New York, there's probably a lot of white, quote unquote, white people who have converted to Judaism.
And that,
that's right.
Oh, that ignores the fact that there have been Ethiopian Hebrews, and we're not talking about blacks as the first Hebrews, guys. Let's not get that confused. But there have been Ethiopian Hebrews
blacks
for the last 2,000. For the last 2,000 years, there's a sizable Ethiopian population in Israel, although Israel is attempting to expel them. There is a sizable Ethiopian population in Israel, and there's a sizable Ethiopian Jew population in the United States. So this notion that, Jews are white people, many of them are. But again, one thing about religion is that religion tends to morph and it tends to absorb whatever the local culture is in order to inculcate itself. So cultural traditions in places like Lalibela are going to be different from cultural traditions in places like Tel Aviv or in New York City. So even the idea that Judaism is the same around the world, right, is a ridiculous notion. And I'm going to leave it at this point. These people have a very simplistic, very oversimplified view of the world and how it is that culture works, how religion works, how any of this works. And it's frankly disturbing, as I said before, and I'll say it again, that these people claim that they want this thing, but they know so little about how they're going to obtain it, what the pre-existing divisions are, and all that other shit. And I'm like, how are you the superior race again? You can't even tell me the history of your own people. So don't tell me that you're superior to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a funny thing. I was like watching. I saw the other one where Sticks Hexenhammer was arguing with alternative hypothesis, and he couldn't answer the simple question: how are you going to obtain it without violence? And he was just stumbling the whole time. He couldn't explain how they would obtain it without violence. It was like, well, we'll pay Black people to leave. This was like, well, what if they refuse to see the money? And then alternative hypothesis were like, well, they could stay, you know.
I was thinking about that. It was like, hey guys, we've got this new government policy where we take a fuck ton of money and give it to like poor minorities and foreigners. What do you think? Like, how would they would not want to get behind that shit. Like, what? I have to give my hard-earned money to what?
I thought they were against things like that. What's that all about?
But it's like,
you know, I thought they were against things like
to me.
Like, trust us, this massive, you know, handout is good for you in the long term. Now give your money to poor Mexicans or something. Like, what?
Well, why do you need this money? Well, you know, I got together with my other friends and we had a meeting and we
if it's an incentive, then they just be like, you know, I've taken the money, but I've decided to stay. Sorry.
Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. Like, you know, this money was great. Thank you for helping me pay off my student loans, but I'm actually gonna stay.
And you know, I get real ornery about it too. Like my family's been here since the 1730s, so I want to see. Okay, Richard Spencer, when did your family get here? When did Sticks and Hexenhammer's family get here? Because as far as I'm concerned, I have a greater claim to the United States, and I don't mean this in kind of I mean this in a mean way to them. I have a greater claim to the United States than they do. So show me your papers.
No,
Also,
to wrap this up, sorry, Kevin, I'm going to push it again, sorry, because I want to. It's our section should probably wrap up, and actually the conversation.
Yeah, like I know.
Yeah, it's okay.
We're getting to.
I'm going to push in again. Sorry. The conversation with Spencer actually then did move to self-deportation, so you guys segued again into it perfectly. So I think we can wrap this section up. But on that, I just want to say, LadyColumbia, my family came over like in the late 1800s, and I have no problem saying that your family have been Americans far longer than my family have. So, you know, in terms of right of return, your family has more claim of a right of return than my Polish family does. But
I love you, Polish family, and I'm glad they came here, Christy. But let go on ahead.
We're both Americans. We're both Americans, but this idea that only white countries should be able to enter the country is complete bullshit. When there are people who have been Americans for far longer. So
just the idea that America is a white nation is ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I mean, okay, you want an ethno-state, but how can you claim that America should be the place where the white ethno-state should be? Because you guys stole it. you stole it.
White people wrote the Constitution, I suppose.
To be fair, what Spencer did mention was different ethno-states within the U.S. So Sargon asked, would you give Florida away to African Americans? And he said, sure. So, you know, if everybody like from sort of you get like DC down over to say Texas.
I love that he's just like gives away all of Florida. He's like, yeah, sure, just take it.
All the white people in the cold areas because that's like Europe, right?
Fine, the doggies can have Florida. Jeez.
What the hell is that noise? Is the other people here?
Oh, sorry. Those are seagulls fighting. Sorry.
That bird is clearly a white identitarian, and you need to do something about that. All right.
He's actually he's like it's a black-beaked seagull versus like a red-beaked one, and so the black one's like yelling at all the red-beaked ones.
Nature.
It's like the star-belly sneetches versus the not star-belly sneetches.
Anyways, Christy. Okay, sorry.
So that's our section done. Thanks. Also
oh wait. I'm sorry, Christy. I'm sorry.
And Jazzy too. Yeah, just her bit to wrap up too.
Yeah, sorry. There's things that Richard. There's something that Richard. There are things that Richard Spencer said that I think do need to be debunked. I mean, he said it. There was for some reason someone brought up affirmative action, and then Spencer said it. You know, in regards to, I think Sargon was again asking him how he would define, you know, how would they figure out who all the white people were. And Spencer said, if you don't benefit from affirmative action, then you're white. And this really, again, I'm sorry, he's really playing on people's ignorance, regarding affirmative action, because the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action in America are white women. And I'm going to put a source in the chat also.
And I also point out that legacies are basically affirmative action for rich white families. legacies at universities. When you're a legacy, you automatically get accepted to the university. That seems to me to be an affirmative action that should be challenged in the courts.
And if affirmative action is trying to deal with some kind of incredibly imbalanced playing field and a great level of inequality between various people, I don't see how it's so much worse and more nefarious than the actual inequality itself, unless you just don't value the people who are, in the lower rungs of society. Like, you just don't value them. And I suppose
it's because we already have equality and there's no racism anymore. So, it's not okay to give them extra stuff.
Because of their skin color and they're not like our people or whatever, you don't value their success at all. So when they get remember,
there's also this idea that that we've progressed so far from the 1950s and 1960s, and now the United States has just become this this post-racial, colorblind meritocracy, and we haven't.
By the way, the official liberalist position, according to Sargon, is that you cannot have a sort of preference in, let's say, going to universities or something based on your identity. However, poor kids would be given privilege. So that apparently means that, say, ethnicity or sex-based identity isn't allowed, but class-based identity is. Just another contradiction.
Anyway, so the next portion was like
the last point. I'm sorry, the last point that I need to make. I think it's to show also how ethnic nationalism is fallacious, because Richard Spencer mentions the Paris Peace Conference about saying how the different countries started dividing things up by ethnic nationalism or something like that. And if people don't know, the Paris Peace Conference 1919, that's where the Treaty of Versailles was rendered, where the blame for World War I was put on Germany, and all these restrictions and sanctions were put on them. It was where new geographical borders were created, and different European states were created. There was nothing really there was nothing like, white nationalist or anything behind it. It was just, it was basically about people who won the war and who wanted spoils for the shit that they went through, because we all know that, the First World War was very violent. And, and just how it just really bothered me how Richard Spencer takes a piece of history and just, tries to, and just spins it in this sort of like revisionist way to cater to his audience and to, misinform people, essentially.
Can I just say, the Paris Peace Accord actually works against the idea of ethnic solidarity for white Europeans, because it was literally the idea of self-determination, and the redrawing of those borders was because it was seen that white Europeans couldn't get along. They kept slaughtering each other in huge numbers. So it actually works against the concept that white people are a united group.
Anyway, so, okay, sorry. Did we...
That's it, sorry.
The next part was, where is the fucking thing? I should have had that up. Okay, my hosting is back to the quality levels you'll expect.
You need a co-host, Tim.
Yes, like a race realist dude, a biologist or something. So an hour 30 to 2 hours.
No, we need a coup to hangout. Simple.
True. Okay, Kevin, host, go. No? Okay. So for an hour 30 to 2 hours, we had somebody on there, but they didn't end up in the hangout, and then we had.
You guys missed me out.
Yeah, well, what were you on? Were you on an hour?
I was an hour to an hour and a half.
God, we're never going to get fucking through this thing. Anyway, okay. Michael.
Then he would take over from our section, yeah. There's really only like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, so if we keep it to like 15, 20 minutes.
We don't have to do the bit where they're just reading Nazi super chats.
Absolutely not.
So, Race Pepe Groiper 1488 says the Holocaust numbers were inflated. That's $10. Thank you so much. Okay, next.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
All right, Michael, what were your thoughts?
I just should say that I just had to move because that seagull was just like running around the place screaming at all the other seagulls, and he wouldn't shut up, and I kept like trying to push him away, but he just kept coming back and yelling at people.
Darwinian bird going on right around Michael.
Controlled by seagulls. That's fucking genius.
So weird. Yeah. Okay, I had a bunch of thoughts. I kind of I mean, for one, Richard Spencer was very stupid. He says a whole bunch of stuff like he's basically just like a learned racist. I mean, that's all I pretty much got from this. He's a racist, and he's like scrounging for reasons to support his racism, and it's just kind of lucky that he's on a call with a bunch of people who allow him to do that, except for in the section that I got to, Carl kind of was questioning him on a couple of things that he said. So like, first of all, one of the things that he said here was, what did he say? He said that America went to the moon within a half century of creating the airplane, and this coincided with a racialist ethno-state immigration policy that began in 1924. And he said, I don't think it just coincided. I think it was caused to a great degree.
Can I
Sargon,
just jump in?
Yeah.
Can I just jump in there quickly on that point? Because it was before I actually joined that hangout, and I wanted to make the point that the Russians got to space first, and the Russian Empire, as it was, the USSR, is an incredibly ethnically diverse place. Yeah, incredibly so. And it beat America to everything other than the moon landing, basically.
I had a bunch of stuff to say on the whole moon thing as well. Sorry, the whole going to space thing as well, because there are multiple reasons why other countries didn't get to space like America and Russia did. But that kind of came later. So he does say it was caused to a great degree, and Sargon instantly says something like, so America's immigration policy put a man on the moon. Yeah, that's your argument. And then Spencer replies, no, I don't think that an immigration policy made the moon landing happen. And so he like automatically strawmans Sargon's apparent straw man of him. It's really bizarre because that's not really what Sargon was saying, and that is exactly what Spencer said, is that this immigration policy caused to a great degree the moon thing to happen, which is just like the most bizarre, ignorant understanding of the space race and the Cold War and anything really. He goes on to then say, why doesn't Ghana have a space program? Which again is just ignorant and bizarre, because one, Ghana does have a space program now, because it has a better economy now than it did back in the day, right? So I wrote a bunch of stuff about, because I was kind of interested about Ghana because he kept bringing it up, and I'm assuming he keeps bringing it up is because it's a place in Africa with black people, therefore it must, yeah, exactly. So it must be. I assume that's why he kept bringing it up. So I did a little bit of research on Ghana, and it's actually quite an interesting place. First of all, it was kind of a contested territory from like the mid 1400s to about the mid 1800s. Europe was like fighting over it because they had a lot of gold in Ghana, right? So there was Swedes, there was Portuguese, there was Dutch, there was German there, and they were all fighting over the area, trying to make it their own, right? So like a lot of other places, it was very contested like that. And then in the mid 1800s, the British established control, and so it became like a British nation or whatever, or a British place. And then Ghana became independent from that in like the 1900s. So like in 19 something or other, they became their own nation, right? And then about 50 years after that, which is now, they have got a space program. So I thought it was kind of interesting because Spencer's idea was that, okay, America's so great because it took them from inventing the airplane to going to space, was like 50 years or whatever, which it was like 70 years. But if you think about it from like the inception of the country, which was like 300 years ago, 1776 was when they became like independent from Britain, right?
Mm-hmm.
It took them over 300 years to get to space. Ghana has taken 50 years from the time that they got rid of Britain. So, it's like, it's kind of a ridiculous argument. The other thing is that when the Cold War was happening and when space was getting all happening and stuff, Ghana was actually occupied by Britain. So it wasn't Ghana's fault that they weren't getting to space. If you've got a problem with them not getting to space during that time, then you've got a problem with Britain.
Michael, I like your little potted history of Ghana there, but you didn't mention the 4 times they've won the African Cup of Nations soccer tournament either. So
well, there you go. There you go. Just.
Oh, God, someone in the chat said Ghana isn't in space, you delusional idiots. That's someone who just doesn't listen well. Because
they are literally in space. They have a space program.
Wait a minute, are they? No way. Really?
Ghana. Yes.
Okay, wait.
They have a space program.
Ghana launches its first satellite into space. They are in space.
Ghana is set to be.
All, Michael.
Yeah. They're set to be the first of the African nations to become. What did I write?
What is
hold on.
This person saying Ghana isn't in space, you delusional idiots. So are all of these just like some conspiracy articles written by like?
No, I think what he means is that there aren't Ghanaians like floating around up there and like creating space colonies and stuff.
Right?
That's really what he's saying.
They launched a satellite, but I mean, like when Russia launched Sputnik or whatever, that was unmanned, right? There wasn't anybody in that, and everyone was like, "That's incredible."
So there was a bunch of reasons why. This is the other thing. It's not like it's not as simple as like this country's great, therefore they get to space. I mean,
Japan.
like. Yeah, and like, okay, so there were a bunch of reasons I wrote down about why America went to space. It's because, well, for one, it was the Cold War, which was like a big dick-slinging competition between them and Russia, right? They were like, we've got bigger rockets than you. We've got better rockets than you. They were both superpowers at the time, so they had a lot of money, and America had inherited a bunch of Nazi and like UK rocket scientists who had already done a whole bunch of work, and so they basically by default were able to make rockets. Other countries didn't have the same advantages and pressures as America and Russia, so they didn't.
Michael, you don't even have to say America and Russia. You can just point towards Russia, and it destroys his whole worldview. Because, like I say, they were and are an ethnically diverse nation, and they were communist. So, and like I say, they beat them to space. They beat them to put in a man in space. They beat them to virtually everything. They had a space station in space 20 years before America got there. So surely we need a multicultural place that's communist. Surely.
You know what's fucking amazing though? Like the best fucking thing ever. Have you guys heard of what was the movie called? Hidden Figures?
Yeah.
Came out last year.
Yeah.
It's about 3 African American women who worked on the space program.
Yeah, figured out all of the trajectories and everything.
Not only did they work on it, they were like integral to it.
Yeah, exactly. They were integral to the fucking space program. So, how can you possibly be like, oh, look how great whites are, we got to space?
I want to address something quickly in the chat. Somebody said that the Ghana satellite, this person in the chat wrote, it's a Japanese student satellite made in Japan. But I'm looking at a BBC News article. It says the development team behind the satellite, 3 African dudes standing in front of a Ghanaian flag, and there's a Ghanaian flag on the table. And in the article, it says it was developed by students at All Nations University in Oforodua in Ghana.
Right.
So what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's 3
and it's an international affair. Right, it's a multinational affair with the Chinese Development Bank, HSBC, China National Space Program, NASA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, India, and the Indian Space Research Organization. So, in a lot of ways, this is a whole rebuke of the idea that we should have ethno-states, because look at all of these different countries working together to build something.
But the 3 Ghanese, is that what you say, Ghanese? The 3 guys from Ghana are completely just wiped away. Ghanaian, sorry, because somebody from Japan helped. And other people
Well, this
from
is
other
the
countries
thing.
are involved. Therefore, let's just completely discard the African guys. Is that how it works?
No, this is the thing, right? Every single space program that's ever existed has been multiracial and multinational. The American space program, as Michael pointed out, there were lots of German, Eastern Bloc, communist defectors from the communist bloc as well. They helped on the American space program. The Russians, obviously, like I say, the USSR encompassed places like the Ukraine and
the African American women were completely discarded and forgotten. That's why it's called hidden figures, because they
exactly. So every
Right,
single
and
space program
it was the United.
The European space program is across the whole of the European Union and beyond. So it's no
Right,
one's
and it was the United
on
Kingdom
their
that developed the spacesuits that we used to get to the moon. Right, it's not like we all had to contribute in order to get Sputnik in the sky, in order to get us to the moon, in order to have these milestones happen. So, and even if you discard the idea of space programs, U.S. history is littered with people who were non-white, who have contributed to the United States' progress, including a person named Benjamin Banneker, who helped to rebuild the White House as well as to do all the surveying work for the city of Washington, D.C. So, this notion
don't count. They just don't count. Like, just ignore them. It's all about the white people, and some Japanese person was involved, so forget about.
Right.
So spread this notion that it's only been white people who have invented things that are worth knowing and things like that. It's just completely ludicrous.
Right.
Yeah, because the root
not
of
to
the
mention
whole...
that it was non-white people who invented civilization to begin with, but we won't even go there.
Yeah.
Let's not take them too far, though.
The root of the whole thing, the reason he's bringing this up is to say that white people are better than black people inherently. Like, there is something inherently better about them, because he goes on to talk about about the great arts that white people invented, like Beethoven and Mozart and shit like that. And he asks, what does he say? The white ethos said, so he says, I want to achieve greatness in the arts. And Sargon asks, is the white ethnostate the best method to achieve this? And he says yes. So he thinks that greatness is inherent in being whiteness. And since we've started this discussion, we've talked about the absurdity of whiteness and how ill-defined it is. It just compounds the absurdity of the whole freaking thing,
Well, let's not bury the lead here. Michael is continuously being trolled by this, I presume, the same seagull, and I'm loving it.
It's a seagull war, right?
Yeah, I'm cheering the seagull on. I hope the seagull gets one over him. It'd be fucking epic.
This seagull troll, we should start a Twitter account for him.
Yeah.
I want to, and again, because I've spent too much time reading Richard Spencer's stuff, but it's very magical thinking when it comes to what their idea of whiteness is. And that's, I think, part of the reason they can't define it in realistic terms or scientific terms is ultimately they think white is magic. I mean, they really do. Like, when they talk about whites having this conquering spirit that drives them to
the Faustian fire.
This exactly, like all this sort of
that thing.
Lived reality.
Nazi poetry, glam garbage.
Sorry, can I just say, they like the idea they've created for themselves in their own head of what whiteness is. But when it comes to, the example I gave with Mike Enoch on the thing I did with Tim, was that he didn't seem to care that Heather Hale was a white woman who was murdered. He defended the murderer. So he doesn't actually give a fuck about white people at all. He just gives a fuck about his interpretation, his version of what he thinks white people are.
And they always mention that she's fat for no reason. Mike Enoch looks pretty fat. So
well, exactly,
I'm sorry, but the majority of folks in this movement really have no place to cast any sort of slur or say anything bad about anyone's appearance.
Mike Enoch is like, a fat feminist died. It's like, you're a fat alt-righter, so is a fat alt-righter is fine, but a fat feminist is bad? Like, how does this work?
Yeah, exactly.
To swerve a little bit.
Point. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure Christianity
no.
point. I didn't cut her off, and then
Flint, go ahead.
It's just, I think ultimately that we have to understand that we're dealing with a sort of article of faith here when we're talking. And I know that this sort of argument has been used against feminists or used against this, but we're really talking about a supernatural element here, a spiritual element, they like to say, but that's what they mean. It's magic, it's, and that's why you can't find whiteness that's why Tim is so terrible and Kevin is such a cuck and I'm such a terrible, horrible person, is because whatever this magical whiteness element is, somehow it failed in us, because
I'm a whiny cuck.
And the funny thing is that they think just because they have that French guy who I think he's supposedly a biologist or something like that, they think that just because they have this one biologist guy who pretty much adheres to all the terms, because he's an alt-right sympathizer, he's a scientific racist. They think that just because they have a scientist on their side that gives their position validity, and it really doesn't.
Really, that's what every Christian apologist will tell you. This guy's a scientist.
We're all talking at once here. Biologists will have a conversation with me, and it's like, of course, no other biologist will have a conversation with you because you're a racist prick, and the things that you're saying have been debunked for years. So it's like, when I first saw when I first saw the whole race realism thing jumping off again, I was like, fuck me. Is it are we back in 2011 again? Because has been debunked. I've been participating on YouTube for a while, just as watching certain channels and then starting to make my own content. And the atheists and skeptics that I watched back then were debunking the fuck out of this race realism shit. And that was fucking 2009. So to sort of see this stuff creep back again, it's just
yeah, and make
oh god, everything
to a co-host of your popular YouTube channel.
One of my favorite things is that the race realists will bring up Rome when Rome was historically one of the most multicultural societies in history.
Yeah.
Back to Christianity's point, one of the things that was interesting was how Richard Spencer was talking about spiritual whiteness. You could be spiritually white, or you could be culturally white. I mean, it's
spiritually white.
Yeah, he does say that in the bit that I was he was talking about, because Sargon was kind of asking him about what white is, and he said something about it's also like a spiritual thing, it's just something that and that's because someone asked him about are Jews white, and he said no, because you can tell they haven't got this thing that
you go walk off into the forest, you look around at all the pine trees, and you look into the night sky, and you're like, I am white. Oh my god.
And to cut in, these people are so concerned about what's good for whiteness. None of this is good for whiteness. None of what they preach is good for white people, because ultimately you end up insulting people who are your trade partners. You end up insulting people who you're going to need. You end up insulting people who hold your debt. You end up insulting people who have major economic, political, and social contributions to your society. How is that ultimately good for white people? How is it good for them?
They're from shithole countries, so.
How is it good for them? How is it good for any white person when there aren't African Americans there to challenge whether or not our rights are actually being enforced? It's in a lot of ways, Black people are the group of people for whom we know, if we actually have rights, because Black people are the ones who are constantly contesting and determining whether there are rights for other groups of people. Right? We're the ones who are being arrested unjustifiably. We're the ones whose freedom is oftentimes challenged. And in a lot of cases, we're the ones who have been fighting for freedoms that other groups of people have been able to flourish from. So how is it a good thing to kick these people out from your state? Do you think that you're not going to have social problems? People aren't going to still be rapists. People aren't going to still be murderers. People, just because it's just a bunch of white people in a country? But off track, ultimately, this is the ethno-state, the idea of an ethno-state, the ideal of an ethno-state is bad for white people. It isn't good.
They
Hold
don't
up,
like
hold up. Can I stop? So, hold, wait up. There's a super
Can I
chat.
just add on
There's
to
a
that?
super chat.
Can I add on to what LadyColumbia was saying?
No, it's a super chat. Everybody shut up. $2 from
What did they
King
say?
Cow Show. They said, take my money.
Okay.
And that me reading
Yeah.
that really contributed a lot to this conversation.
Yeah,
All right.
well done. You're a regular Watsky. Have you,
Now go.
if any of you guys watched the Vice documentary, where the woman followed around Chris Caldwell, and she was talking to him, and he seemed to be you were talking about are there going to be no social problems in the white ethno state. I think they actually believe that that's true, because he says that white people don't I can't remember the quote exactly, but he says white people generally don't partake in this kind of behavior. He referred to like Tamir Rice and the ones that they always refer to, like black kids hanging around acting like thugs and stuff and getting themselves killed. And he's like, that's just, yeah. And he's just like, that's not something that white people tend to engage in. And I was like, what the fuck? Like he doesn't think that white people are actually, she brings up Dylan Roof, and he's like, that's only just like one example. And then she's like, Oklahoma City. And then he's like, oh yeah, so you have to go all the way back to Oklahoma City. And it's like, no, there are, you can find examples, many examples of
Las Vegas just happened.
Oh, Olivia, super chat. Hi, friends, lol.
Yeah.
$2.
So it's they either willfully or not willfully are completely ignorant. I assume it's willfully, because how could you not know this shit? That whites are somehow unable to cause crime, I suppose.
I agree with LadyColumbia's point, where she said that the white ethno states is actually bad for people, because me and a friend were talking about how much it would actually cost in taxpayers' dollars to get black people to leave, and my friend calculated $10 trillion in tax money, so it would make America go completely bankrupt.
That's a lot of super chats.
$10 trillion? Wait, what was that based on?
$10 trillion.
That's a lot of money. Where did you get that?
It's a lot of people. This is
And Tim,
Yeah.
I expect to see a cut of that super chat.
Well, now we have $4 super chat, so I'm gonna definitely split it up amongst my guests. So how many people?
I demand my 70 cents.
9 people.
Right?
Myself.
Oh, the cost. First of all, how do you get Congress to approve of a law that says we're going to pay black people to leave? How do you get them? Because the moment that they start to pass a law, they write the law, there's going to be international uproar about how are you writing a law that says that people have to leave your country. It violates international law, so everybody's going to be pissed off about it. How do you get Congress to even pass that law? How do you get it written?
Yeah.
Also, and because I have to make.
That would piss pretty much most black people off. I mean, sure, you got the weird ones like that guy T and Tree of Logic who are actually for a white ethno state, but that doesn't.
So they can leave.
I am so sorry. I am so sorry that I ever heard of the name Tree of Logic. That lady, holy shit. And the weird thing is that with that little tiff that she had with Red Pill Black, it's almost like you're almost there to realize that yes, there are even racist people on your side of the line, but at the same time, there's just so much anti-black woo, and
it just seems like that stuff happened with like Lauren Southern and stuff. Suddenly realizing that their movement hated them, you'd think people would learn from that shit.
Realizing that they're that the men in their movement actually expect you to to do nothing but get your ass back in the kitchen and push out babies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes to
I feel so bad for them.
Yeah.
like Tree of Logic, she he considers herself a white identitarian or something like that. It was like really weird listening to her talking to millennial votes about, how, the white ethno state needs to happen, and she was discussing ways on how to get Black people to leave or something. It was really weird listening to Chief Logic talk.
And he was just like, I like your attitude, so you can come. You're allowed to come because you say the right things. And like, that's the new metric for how we decide this ethno state.
Well, can I just say, the idea of paying people to leave, right, is obviously racist against people of colour, but it's also racist against white people like me, because I will want to leave as well, and I won't be allowed the money to be able to do it.
Yeah, you don't get free money. You don't get affirmative leaving action.
You know what I mean? Exactly. I've paid my taxes all my fucking life, and I won't even get the money to be able to emigrate.
Yeah, you're like, I want to leg up to move to a different country, but I'm not getting paid anything. This is
no fucking way I'm staying in that fucking shithole ethno state.
Well, tell them you're Black. Apparently, they're telling you're Black.
I'm culturally Black.
I'm Jewish.
I love blues music and jazz.
Could I just say a couple more things from my section? You
can always go with the whole culturally Black thing if you try to pull it.
I only listen to rap music.
Let's get Michael's section.
There were a couple of points I just wanted to bring up that I thought were either relevant or just showing you how much of a, not that no one knows that Richard Spencer's a piece of shit, but he seemed to think that this guy Madison Grant was a cool dude and think that he was like a eugenics dude. So eugenics will be a thing. There was another thing he said, which was basically that he's got that the ethno state would have they would create an elite class of highly educated kind of guardian warriors to maintain order. So basically, like
The Last Airbender, yeah.
Thought police, propaganda.
This is basically like, it's like fantasy football, but for society. He's just plucking bits of shit out of the air. It's just nonsense. Yeah, he's just in his own head.
Yeah, I would think that multiple white people would be miserable in the white ethno state because, like, they don't want gay people around. Like, if you're gay, trans,
exactly,
or they want eugenics. They want mentally, they want low IQ white people to do voluntary eugenics.
And I guess what will happen to Hollywood, just because there's Jewish people in Hollywood, so replace it with like culturally and pure white people can make all of the.
Oh God, it's gonna be.
I only have one question: how are you white people gonna live without rap music? All right.
Well, I can have Eminem and Logic, and
I have the whitest music taste though, so I'll probably be okay. I like heavy metal.
No,
so.
Vox earworm is
what's
converting me.
Living Color?
Yeah, that woman's great, man. She's got some. She's got some good ideas.
I love blues rock.
How are you guys gonna know how to look, what to wear, how to dress,
right?
How to season your food, like how to wash yourselves? Like, sorry.
Doesn't it sound like the white ethno state would be the most boring place to live in the world?
Yes.
I mean, it just seems like every time they talk about it.
You're walking around putting perfume on yourself.
What do you mean? White people know how to wash themselves.
Hello.
Like, bitch, no, there's stuff that you use.
Hello, fellow white man. How great is white person? It's so good to be white. Have a good day.
Have a white day.
have a white day.
You would have to model it after Hitler's.
A guy in the
you'd have to model it after like Hitler's Germany.
Being racist against black.
Well. Right. White people, it would be a lot like Nazi Germany because you'd have to have a youth programs. You'd have to have a lot of like state sponsored activities because no one's gonna do, it's not gonna be fun at all. You have to eliminate non-white sports. So the only sports you can play are like golf and tennis, and I love tennis, so I'd be happy.
I'm terrible at basketball, so that's good for me.
Right? There'd be no, football would be boring. I cannot imagine what
cricket would be boring.
Yeah, it'd be cricket.
Well, cricket's huge. Cricket's huge in India. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Polka would be.
The West Indies are great at. Yep.
By the way, Tim, this might be the time to call out your really big super chat.
Yeah, there's a bunch of super chats going on. This said, from only my railgun, SEK, I don't know what SEK is, SEK 200. Super chats being read in the stream is a big win in the marketplace of ideas. I agree.
Yep. Because paying for your ideas to get to the top is how the marketplace of ideas works, right?
I will split this up between online participants. So, anyways, what are we up to?
Yep.
Conversation.
I had one more thing to say that I thought was really funny. This was just funny. Because he says, my idea of the white race is to revive the past and indeed rival the past by reigniting that this Faustian fire within us. And so I didn't know what Faustian meant, so I went and I looked it up. And this was the definition I got. Faustian implies a situation in which an ambitious person surrenders moral integrity in order to achieve power and success. I just thought that was really funny.
Yeah, it's like it's like Richard Spencer never ever read the history of Dr. Faustus, because the history of Dr. Faustus, where the word Faustian comes from, is about a guy who sells his soul to the
devil. Yes.
Yeah, and Goethe, who is like one of the most legendary literary figures of Germany, he wrote a really famous.
So he sells his soul to the devil, and he doesn't even have a good time with it anyway. His life goes to shit. So
he doesn't even play guitar well. I mean, he obviously got that wrong. I mean, you sell your soul to the devil, you get to play guitar good. Come on, jeez.
Exactly. He didn't even shred it up at all. It was embarrassing.
he didn't have a shred battle with Steve Vai. So what the hell?
Sorry, I am just because I'm not sure. Goethe's Faust is a novel or is it a play? It's a novel, right? Yeah,
it's a novel.
Right.
Original. But I think it's been made into a play everywhere, yeah.
Right, yeah. Okay, so
Super chat
the next
question.
part we're up to was like an hour to an hour 30, whatever, but I think the person who was going to do that isn't here, so and I don't know if we covered that bit. And then there was Bronx Blogger.
Can we get the seagull? The seagull should do it, I think.
I can take a look at Bronx Blogger's notes.
The opinion of the seagull. Mr. Seagull, what do you have to say about the white ethnostate?
Well, I think actually Kaiser Sats has a good question in the super chat.
Will there be bits?
Oh my god, I can't deal with all these super chats, man. It's
That's
like
why I'm helping you out, Tim.
I'm not used to this. This is not my world. Okay. He says, since the white ethnostate is patently fantasy, do you think there might be a more strategic point in pushing the idea? Pushing what idea? What do you mean?
Well, I think this is actually a question I've been waiting. No, Kevin, I want to talk. I'm pushing it. So this is actually a question I wanted to raise, and then I forgot it because the conversation kept going. But clearly, even Spencer himself says that he doesn't think... Sorry, can people, if they're not talking, mute themselves? Spencer himself says that he doesn't think that the ethnostate is a realizable goal like in his lifetime. He says this is something we have to think about 50 or 150 years down the road. What he wants to use it as a focal point and as a way to organize people to a common goal. But that itself seems, in and of itself, doesn't seem to advance the alt-right strategy that I can see. And so I think the question that was asked, or at least the one that I had in my head, is what is the purpose of uniting people around an ethnostate? How does this rally the alt-right, especially since the concept of whiteness is so problematic and they don't want to talk about it? So what is it that they do want to talk about in relation to an ethnostate? And that might be cultural whiteness or something like that. And I don't know. I think that's a question that should be, talked about. I'm done.
I would like to add on to that point, because like you said, that Richard Spencer says that he doesn't see that his goal is going to be realized until 50 years from now. But they also say that white people are going to be a minority within 50 years. So to me, the two ideas contradict each other. Because it's like, white people are going to be a minority and they're going to be abused, and, there's going to be this really
Is it more
weird...
like they're going to be a minority if we don't make an ethno-state? Isn't that kind of what they're on about?
That's kind of like, how is the ethno-state going to be realized if white people are also going to be, a minority within 50 years, and brown people are still oppressed?
Yeah,
I think one of the reasons, if I can throw this out, I'm sorry. I think one of the reasons that he says, "Oh, this is 50 years from now, this is 100 years from now," is because I think that's a hiding of his power kind of idea. I think he's trying to dodge some questions, and when people are trying to tie him down, how is this going to work? How is it going to avoid violence? How is it going to avoid bloodshed? Why the heck would we want to do it? He's like, oh, it's we're not even there yet. So don't even worry. Don't worry your pretty heads about that. We'll worry about that. I think in his mind, I'm not exactly sure when he thinks that the ethno-state is going to come or not, but he definitely, I don't think that it's a, in some ways, it is like the religious people thinking about the kingdom come that's going to show up someday. But in other places, I think that he does definitely intend to bring it about. I don't think this is simply a bait and switch, though he tries to do other things because he's got this incrementalist idea. First, we have to do this. Then we have to get enough money. Then we have to get enough say, and we have to get a certain number of people. But he sees things like, Mussolini and Hitler, they never got a majority in any of their countries. They just took power. I think that's what he wants. He wants to get enough people with enough leverage and money and to take power. And in the meantime, while he's doing these that's his idea. I don't think it's going to work. But in the meantime, where he's setting all this stuff in motion and setting stuff up, he's going to tell us, oh, no, it's fine. It's not going to be for 100 years. But he's not planning America. He's not planning a place with the Bill of Rights. He's not planning to continue to be
Chris,
America with less white people.
Let me because I think it's two-part. I think, one, the way that they talk about it is the conversion of a pre-existing state. They're not talking about, go in and buy some little country. They spent $20,000 in super chat. They could have taken that money, bought a little plot in Idaho, started a little communist set, and really started on this ethno state for real. I think this is two-part for Spencer. I think this is about avarice. I think that he has a BA in political science and a master's in communication. I think he's got loans to pay off, and I think that this is an easier way to do it than going out and getting a regular workaday job. So I do think that there is some avarice involved, particularly with him. But I also think that, this is a real pursuit. He sees an opportunity. He sees white people fearing their position in the world as Black people become more assertive about their rights in the United States, as Hispanic people become more assertive about their rights, as people around the world become more aware of the effects of colonialism and imperialism, particularly that was inflicted on them by Western Europe. I think that they are capitalizing on a fear that a lot of white people have about their position on the planet, about who they are and what their identity is. If their identity isn't as a colonizer or as a superior race, who are we? What does that mean for us?
Well, I think
and I think that
basic white grievance is white grievance is kind of like the opening that they go through, and then they try to widen that divide as much as they possibly can. So they start with it's okay to be racist against white people, and look at these people doing affirmative action and oppressing poor whites, and oh look, poor whites don't have privilege, and this is what they think of you, and racism against whites is fine, and they try to widen that divide more and more and more until they're being like, maybe we should have our own country. Yeah.
Right. I totally agree with that. And so I think it's a melange of things that Spencer and his apparatchiks and his peers are trying to accomplish. I think you take a person like Styx Hexenhammer is more of a person who is, I think, just trying to worm his way into a niche. I think Millennial Woes is a true believer. He's a person who's actually trying to bring this about. I think Andy Worski is an opportunist. He's somebody who sees all of this going on around him and says, how can I make $1 off of it? And I think you have so many different factions of people that the first thing you have to look at is what are these people's motivations and where are they coming from? And for a lot of people, I think that, for a Sargon of Akkad, he's a useful idiot. His job is to lead people down that path, either knowingly or unknowingly. And
it's really hard to tell if it's knowingly or unknowingly, to be honest, because
it's hard, but it ultimately.
I don't know if
it ultimately doesn't matter.
I don't know if it's hard to tell if it's knowingly or unknowingly, mainly because from conversations that I've seen folks have with Sargon, like Michael Brooks, or like he had a conversation with Benjamin Dixon. These are the things that he believes in regards to race and things like that. Like you find the same. You find the same in Andy Worski. They're really no different.
But it's more haphazard. It's all over the place. It's really haphazard. It's just a basic idea of like racism is never important. It doesn't matter. But if you turn it into kind of like a systemic organized racism, which structures a whole society, then they start having a problem with that, because then it's too official. Then they don't like it.
Because Sargon of Akkad sat there.
But they won't even admit that even still goes on. Like, they're more liable to be like, oh, well, they're more focused on, oh, well, everybody, you could just feel like all this anti-white sentiment. What about white people?
Well, they want to pretend like race doesn't matter unless their feelings are hurt as white people. Then it matters. But besides that, it doesn't matter.
Or if they're battling with Richard Spencer, because when Sargon of Akkad had to sit there and face the kind of extreme version, or at the very least where his ideas lead to, he seemed to have a lot of disagreement with what Spencer was saying. But when you confront him about what he believes, then there's all that pushback from him about, well, I'm not a racist and da-da-da-da-da. So that's why I'm not giving the benefit of the doubt. I don't know. And it doesn't matter whether he knows or he doesn't know, because the effect is the same.
Exactly. That's pretty much where I am with all of them.
Right. The effect is thousands of these people who have these ideas about anti-white sentiment reinforced, when in fact white people are white people have grievances, and there are going to be times when interpersonal racism affects them. And frankly, this sort of this nebulous anti-white sentiment thing really obfuscates from white people who do end up being discriminated against, who are subject to being oppressed by their economic and political system. Instead, it takes the focus away from real problems that white people face and puts them into this imaginary space of, we are being oppressed by black people who run the government, and Obama's a secret Muslim who wants to convert us all to Islam, instead of focusing in on the fact that our economic system harms us all, or our political system is denying us the ability to change aspects of our society that hurt us all.
Yeah, a class lens could help there. It could provide solidarity for the people who are actually struggling in society, not like a racial lens, which I think just doesn't help anybody. Sorry.
I also think an important difference to notice between like Spencer and Carl and Andy is that Carl and Andy, like you say, are basically just useful idiots. They aren't smart people. They're ignorant on a lot of issues, and their only claim to any sort of thing is the fact that they have a YouTube channel. Spencer's actually an educated man who understands this stuff, and I think that makes him more dangerous. Like Carl and they don't have any sort of. Is
he an educated man? I mean, I think somebody said he dropped out of. Education.
Yeah, but he dropped out because he had a plan, right? He knows what he wants, and he knows how to kind of go about it. Sargon and Andy are just kind of like bumbling fools going, oh, blah, 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 do this.
Well,
you know?
it's
Sargon
hard
is
to tell because
almost literally bumbling around.
you
at the
don't
moment.
know whether Spencer has a plan or he's just hiding what his plan actually is, because he's been confronted. David Sherratt confronted him, and he's been confronted on several occasions with what is the plan to create the ethno-state, and he will never say. Either he doesn't know or doesn't have one, or he's trying to hide his power levels.
When it comes to Richard Spencer, to me, I don't get how, like, it's like he sounds so much like a cult leader. I mean, he talks about, a home, a spiritual being, and whatnot. He sounds like level by level or point by point like a cult leader. He says everything that a cult leader would say, like white is, going to the moon. White is a way of being. He just sounds so much like a cult leader. He doesn't really just give you anything definitive. Like he doesn't go like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to like pay like Black people like, for $400,000 to leave, and if that doesn't work, we are going to have freedom of association so that people could ban Black people from stores. It doesn't give you like step by step what they're gonna do. He sticks to like these abstract ways.
He keeps saying it's an ideal.
Yeah, he keeps saying that. You're right. He keeps saying that it's an ideal. And I want to take that idea of him sounding more like a cult leader even further. In fact, that's why you see people like him and other groups like him really making the push to speak more at colleges now. Because the point, even if you don't, when he said that he realizes that his ideal is something that most likely will not happen in his lifetime, but further down. So what does a person do when they know, like, this ideal that I want will probably not come about in my lifetime. So what I can do is I can make sure that these ideas continue to be perpetuated. And where's the best place that you can start really planting the seeds for bad ideas to continue to perpetuate? You catch children, or you catch people who are just, especially, 17-year-old, 18-year-olds who are just, they leave home and they're going to a new place and learning how to form new ideas. Like, that's the best place to try to catch folks and just infect them with this propaganda. As much as, right-wingers complain that, colleges are like, leftists or liberal, are like the places where leftists and liberals look to, congregate and get more people into their base, into the ideology or whatever. You actually find that more right-leaning groups actually take that up, and I think it's really becoming a thing.
When we're talking about Sargon, for example, like he has an issue with the more organized official type of racism, but constantly harping on every single day about every minor thing that happens to white people in order to try to like compete with Black people and other groups who have these issues. I think that is the in to the alt-right. Like, it opens the door and it says like, okay, we need to organize and we have to like fight back. And the way to do that is to come up with some kind of official ideology, like collective ideology, where we band around our white grievance. And I think maybe Sargon and others in that skeptical sphere aren't aware of the implications of constantly going on and on and on about like bad things happening to white people. But I think that is the kind of like the spark. And then, as you said, like Richard Spencer like plants the seed, which he wants to grow, turn that white grievance into like a big, I was going to go with tree metaphor.
The more he goes on these streams, that Andy has, or pretty much talks to anyone, he gets to spread his message through his base. And because of the type of folks who are having these, conversations, quote unquote, which is basically like, thought exercises or lack of thought exercises.
Should Jews be allowed to live? We'll discuss today.
Right.
Yeah, we will be discussing the JQ.
Yeah.
For Richard Spencer, he takes every opportunity as an opportunity to inculcate new minds.
Yes.
Right, so when Sargon tries
Exactly.
to counter that, he can't think of anything because he can't actually engage on the racism and racial angle particularly. He can only focus on these like civic ideas to do with like philosophy and first principles and John Locke and Thomas Paine and the Enlightenment, because he doesn't have.
But she really has no leg to stand on with those either.
Yeah,
Right,
I was just about to. I was, honey, you read my mind. He couldn't even manage that because at the end of the day, Spencer is advocating the overthrow of all of the Western all of our all of our treasured Western liberal ideas of a pluralistic liberal democracy. Yeah. The white ethno state overturns all of that, right? But Sargon didn't know well enough to even challenge him on both. You can't have what you're advocating for and what we have. So you can't take over any pre-existing state. You have to create a state of your own in order to ensure that your ideas are met out in the way that you want them met out. Because otherwise, you're going to have to commit to using the state's violence in order to get to the point you want to get to. And Sargon just kind of kept going around. He kind of kept talking about tyranny. Sargon has a problem with, he doesn't know how to actually use facts. He only ever uses rhetoric. So he doesn't know how to engage someone without saying things, rhetorical things. Like you're talking about engaging in tyranny. Tyranny is rhetoric. Talk about what tyranny is. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think he's seeded the moral landscape. So he can't talk about something just on the grounds that it's a bad thing to do, that it's fucked up. He has to go back to like some.
He doesn't know, and he doesn't know deep. He doesn't know much about even the stuff that he does go into. It's all like his quote unquote knowledge at best is mostly superficial.
Well, what's the point in like worshipping principles if you can't explain why they're morally right as well? Like how it's a good thing.
Exactly. Like exactly. And that's another thing that Christy brought up that was to the sort of the detriment of this conversation. Everyone was just throwing out all these sort of terms, but nobody really was in the mood to actually define what terms that they're using so that everyone could be on the same page. Yeah. And and
John Locke, just virtue signaling.
And Andy calls himself a moderator. And Andy calls himself a moderator. He was a shit moderator, or maybe it's just me. But like,
hey, moderating is hard. I mean, I'm running this here right now.
I get that. But I mean, like, even if you are having like a conversation, like if you know someone you brought on is saying something like factually incorrect, wouldn't you be like, hold up, actually I have to stop you there because what you said was not only factually inaccurate, it's just highly wrong.
Yeah.
Well, shit, we can't even get that for presidential moderation, girl.
That's right.
So, Ren,
am I asking too much? Am I just asking for too much? What's going on?
Sorry, Ren has a comment.
Yeah,
Ren. Yeah, sorry, honey.
I think that Andy Worski wanted to keep it like the Jerry Springer show. He doesn't want to really moderate and, mute people and give everybody a chance to talk. He wants people to argue, fight, bitter. He wants the bloodbath there because he's like, wow, we are trending and we're number one worldwide. For him, it's like the Jerry Springer show. It's like Jerry Springer 2.10.
And he was getting thousands of dollars of super chats. So why would he bother?
That's what makes these dialogues even more dangerous, because if you with the type that they have, if you just go in and everything is much more informal, where nobody is checking and nobody is really checking anybody on whether they have said is actually true or not, that makes those types of conversations basically all that more dangerous. All he really does is allow bad ideas to be perpetuated without anybody checking.
All right, and
checking them on.
To come,
I want to make sure.
Sorry,
everybody.
Wait a second. Just wait. Okay, to come to my moderation role now. So we had two middle sections, an hour 30 to 2 hours, 2 hours to 2 hours 30, but both of those participants couldn't make it. So I think the next part that I had was 2 hours 30 to, I guess, about 3 hours 30, and I had Chrysiosity and TheLadyColumbia down for that, but we haven't heard too much from Kevin or Sonia or Michael or Chrissy. So I guess we need to get your guys' voices in here and just your impressions. I guess, Chrissy, you did 2 hours 30 to 3 hours, right? So
yeah.
Chrissy?
Did people want to say something before I go, or the only
I
thing
just want to tell you I love you.
I love you too, and I don't want you to move to Florida, and I don't want you to be in some other place.
I'll take Florida, because Florida has a $1.3 trillion GDP, a viable oil state. He doesn't even know what to give away. You know, even the founding fathers knew to give the Native Americans the shitty land. All right. He's talking about giving away one of the wealthiest states in the union.
And Puerto Rican.
For real. And Cubans and sea access, please.
But anyway, so
suck it.
bringing some structure back to this conversation, it's just like the middle section, I guess we can't cover it so well just because those folks aren't really here. But I think, you know, we do need to hear more from Kevin and Sonia, if Sonia's around.
I'm still here. I'm just like working in the chat and stuff.
Oh, cool. Okay, so the spearhead of the next thing was Chrissy.
Okay, 1 second. I'm just going to let my husband know that he's being deputized.
Oh, some shit's happening. Okay, something's gone down. Kevin, say something. Or Michael. Or both.
Something.
Why are you picking on the white men? You're so sexist and racist. Clearly.
For real.
Okay, who should it...
You need to go hang out with that seagull.
Tim.
Help, I'm being repressed.
Tim, go ahead. So, basically, having a good day. I got nothing.
All right, so
Can I just, before we start, I want to say that when I watched Sargon and V give their response to the critiques of liberalistism, one of the things they said was that the progressive community like us, we have no arguments to make against the alt-right. So I just want to point out how many hours of discussion have we had. I think we've made some pretty good points.
And how badly did he fail? He was utterly, he completely flopped on his fucking ass in that debate.
Mm-hmm.
Are they scared of like really criticizing Sargon's ideas because if you challenge them too much, his ego discombobulates and then you'll be kicked out of the liberalist movement?
Yes, because look what happened when David Chirac dared to go against Sargon in any way whatsoever. He's been cast out as a demon. You know? Yeah,
if you're like, oh, you know, I think maybe we should reconsider some of the ideas we have about collectivism. It'd be like, okay, we've booted him. Now, who else wants to give an opinion?
I think if someone insults Sargon, you know, right away into a discussion, he will immediately go into defensive mode and it'll completely throw him off his game. Especially if the other person stays really calm and sort of makes little digs at him.
I like the idea of starting a movement just based around my own views and opinions, and then everybody has to walk on eggshells around me. In case
we saw what happened when Sargon was actually challenged by both Christie and Michael Brooks. Like, he couldn't answer a simple question. Michael Brooks spent the whole entire debate asking him to define regressive, and he never did.
He said, what you just said sounds like what a regressive would say, and Michael was like, that's great, good, so let's drill down on that, and then they couldn't for like an hour.
Yeah. It was stupid, you know, so when he's actually challenged on his ideas.
I think Tim's description of the liberalist thing as basically the Sargon being like building a fucking political philosophy around him is quite accurate. And ironically, therefore, it means that he's essentially setting up his own internet dictatorship, even though he claims to be anti-authoritarian.
Internet dictatorship.
Well, that was my plan. I'm mad because I wanted the internet feudal state for me.
Sorry?
You've already got Florida. Fuck's sake. What more do you want?
Oh, bye, Sonia.
Oh, you're leaving. You didn't even say anything in this hangout.
Bye.
Don't leave us.
Bye. Sorry.
Bye. We love you.
My moderation failed.
Bye.
We'll be gone for another 4 hours, honey. So just if you can get back, get back.
Damn it. Should have kept saying Sonia.
We should have just all shut up and let Sonia talk.
Do you guys want to see my cruise ship? Because I'm at a good distance that I could show you. Just as an aside.
Yeah, let's see this.
Seagull, bitch. What the fuck?
Seagull's gone.
Wait, we wanted to see.
Seagull's gone, motherfucker.
Right.
Oh, wait, is that me? Or...
Nobody
I went and got Subway.
No, I'll switch to Michael.
How do I do that? I
just click on it.
Yeah, I clicked on.
Am I a thing? Is it working? I don't know.
Yep, you're up.
What if Paul finds you from this footage?
Oh, jeez.
We've located Michael
Can't see what my
Rollins.
feet. Oh, right there it is. Hold on. It's behind a tree now. That's it there over there. Behind that tree. That's the top of it anyway.
Where are you?
Kind of there.
Oh no, you can.
I'm in Tauranga.
No, you stuck yourself.
Ah, no. Well, I'm only in Tauranga for like a day, so you know.
Show the seagulls.
They've gone.
Did you murder?
See, this is the problem. Seagull racism. All right, this is what happens. All right, seagulls don't get representation, and then they don't get on the live stream. Come on.
I actually saved a seabird last time we were here because I was sitting up on the open deck of the ship, and there was a seabird that had fallen onto the deck, and he couldn't get off again. So I like picked it up and like hit it and walked off the ship because you have to go through like security and shit. So I had to like hide it from the security and went out and came and brought it down to the sea and set it free.
So we've got a reporter in the field.
There you go.
He's out there. He's hit the streets. He's getting the opinions. Let's get some views on the race war.
Yeah, there's been,
all right, let's go to Chris.
There's already been 5 attacks.
Okay.
There's already been some grenades. There's some grenades that went off in the local area.
Looks like pure chaos
and there
out
was
there.
a stabbing.
New Zealand is a war zone. The whole society is falling apart.
There's all the seagulls over there. Look, they're all being
Seagull
oppressed.
war is escalating horribly.
Right? Someone call Peter Sweden.
Oh God, this is Peter, New Zealand.
Peter Sweden.
That motherfucker. Oh my God.
Anyway,
Right.
so Chris is back.
Yeah.
So-
Chris.
Michael.
All right.
So at the hour 3 mark, Styx signs off. Andy and Spencer go take a break, and that French JF guy and Millennial Woes, who are very happy to just have this time on the #1 live stream on YouTube to sit there and talk about how racist they are. And I really want to make sure that we make the point that, Andy, this is terrible. You're terrible. What you're doing is horrible, and you know it. And that's why everybody who criticizes you have a freaking butthurt emergency about it, because you're just taking money to perpetuate hate, and that's not okay. It's disgusting. All right, so having virtue signaled there, like I do, that's right, because, you know. So they talk about race, and Millennial Woes is bringing out his Denzel Washington black argument, and the JF guy says that
Lawrence Fishburne.
No, he said, well, this time it was Denzel Washington.
Oh, it switched. Okay, cool.
It switched. You know, there's at least two black people in the world: Lawrence Fishburne and Denzel Washington, and Uma Thurman is white. So we've identified.
What about Morgan Freeman?
3. No, look, we're not going. We've only got like 300 something million to go, but we've got the 3. All right, so JF says that humans have super high visual treatment features that we can't put into words, but it's very precise. And he evidences this by saying that most people know their own race, that self-reported race matches quote-unquote genetics in most cases, which wouldn't be the same thing anyway. I mean, if you ask me, I can tell you. I can tell you that my family came from Ireland and Scotland. That doesn't mean that I can look at you, and tell you what your race is necessarily. And I know from working in a doctor's office where it was my job to ask every single person, and I don't even care if Denzel Washington had come in, I would have asked Denzel, what is your race? You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how complex a topic that is. Just because when you're walking around in the street, you look at people and you're making these sort of designations in your head, in as much as you're doing that anyway, that doesn't mean that that's what they really are. And there's nothing that says that just because you've decided in your head that this person is black and this person is white, they would agree with you, right? So anyway,
so basically it just comes down to You just know. Come on, guys. You just know. It's obvious. That's basically their argument.
Exactly.
And
we're going to base an entire culture and world on that, on just knowing.
It's like presuppositional apologetics. That every person is born with the innate ability to know that God exists, and they can't deny it. They just know. It's the same friggin' thing. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is. It's God obviously exists. Look at the clouds and the trees. And the butterfly.
Guys, look at the seagulls. Look at the seagulls. Obviously, race exists.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, they're staring at me right now. Anyway, sorry, Chris. Don't mean to derail.
Of course they are. You've murdered their friend. Of course they're staring at you.
He was being really annoying.
You know I'm too talky, so you guys can just shut me up at any point because
No. Yeah, I've talked too much.
Heaven forbid. Please continue, Chris.
All right. So Millennial Woes then goes into discussing genetic whiteness versus cultural whiteness, and then he says that whites have a spiritual character that causes them to behave in this certain white way that's not really defined, except when they're forced into situations they wouldn't naturally want, like multiculturalism and communism, which leads them being forced to act differently. And, this, of course, becomes sort of this entire thing is set up and predicated on no true Scotsman. So anytime a white person is acting white, I guess, that's good and that's natural. But if you did something that they weren't agreeing with, like us, like people who are gay or people who are this, then apparently you've been forced out of whiteness, or this is unnatural whiteness that's being put on you. It doesn't make sense, but that's the idea.
When you say acting white, all I can think about is like white person dancing. So when they're being forced into a situation that they don't like
line dancing, yeah,
like a disco or like hip hop concert.
When they're forced into a situation like using spice in their food or something hideous like that.
Well, I believe that the Russian people who instituted communism in Russia were white. Am I wrong? Am I confused on that point? Stalin is white, Not
all of them. Not all of them. And of course, people like Leon Trotsky would be seen as not white by the white supremacists because they're Jewish. So.
Well, Bronx wrote in his notes that Spencer said Russia was historically Jewish. Is that true?
Well, it has. No. The pogroms and things like that. I mean, there's been a history of anti-Semitism in Russia, but there have been a number of Jewish people in Russia. Yeah,
Jewish people existed in Russia, therefore Russia's Jewish. Is that how it works?
Like I said, it's a no true Scotsman thing. We have to figure out why Russia doesn't count because it was communist and we hate communists.
I think every country that has Jewish people in it is Jewish. So America is a Jewish country. And,
Well, that's the thing, though. Going back to the thing we mentioned earlier about the space race, if communism and multiculturalism are so bad, how did the USSR get to space first?
Because it's a Jewish country, so high IQ. Okay, forget it.
It's because the Jews have all the monies, and they were able to pull strings to make the space high go. Yep.
Sorry, I didn't catch all of Chrissy's points, but was it generally just about whiteness and
being white and acting white, so doing bad, good things.
And they're not. It's not like white is a defined characteristic, right? It's just like, I don't know, goodness, good natural whiteness, which is, and they don't talk about, but there is a clear undercurrent, of course, of hating Black people because the white people are good and the Black people are then what, and the Jewish people who aren't white are then what? So if you're not good, you must be right. Like it's
Degenerate.
It's in there, and it peeks out in places, this hate they've got, but they're suppressing it as hard as they can. They're not wanting to talk about how much they hate these people, but they do.
Someone in the chat pointed out the Protocols of Zion was made in Russia, but I mean, that's an anti-Semitic conspiracy text, right? So I don't know if it proves.
Come in on this.
It's nonsense.
There's a
Christy,
story
yeah.
that it's been actually in my mind for a very long time, and I wasn't sure why, but this seems a good time to bring it up. I was listening to, on a long trip back from Florence, several podcasts. One of them was like a real crime thing. My point here is that they had an example of a serial killer in Nazi Germany. And the tie I want to make is this idea that Christiosity brought up with millennial woes and whiteness being associated with goodness, and therefore if you had the perfect white society, crime wouldn't be an issue. And the idea that when you have bad whites, spiral of purity, right, we're degenerate, and you get those people out of the society too in order to finally attain this perfect whiteness in society as well as within an individual, I guess, is the crap they're peddling. But the case involved a man who was a serial rapist and murderer in Berlin. He attacked his victims first. What was happening was the city of Berlin was ordered to at night in order to avoid Allied bombing. And this guy took advantage of that because the factories were still running 24 hours a day. And with all the men at the front, it was women in the factories. So he was part of the SS, and he was in a unit that was able to stay in Berlin with his family. And he took this opportunity that the night afforded him to first lie in wait in gardens. Sorry, Jazzy, I can hear your background. Sorry. Foxy, I can hear your background. All right. So, and then when the police started to actually monitor it, he moved to the trains and started killing women. And under the Nazi system, of course, there was not supposed to be this sort of crime. And what the police ended up doing was, instead of putting out alerts and notifying the media, they covered it up until after the crime was solved, and then Hitler took credit for it. But under these systems, you're not going to get open, transparent justice, because the existence of crime itself within a white community is a failing of the white community. And the kinds of justice you would get, I think, would be kind of similar. Well, in this case, the serial killer his crime was judged to be political, because by hunting women at night when there was the war on, it made women afraid to go to work in the factories, and therefore it was hurting the war effort. Therefore, he was charged and investigated, and within 2 weeks, he was executed by the Nazis. And I just, that when Spencer was when I went through and put together all of the elements of Spencer's ideology and the little bits and pieces, when you kind of put those summary bits together, that's the story that I was reminded of.
And I think, Chris, you were saying earlier that they want to, show how nice they are. They want to show how nice they are to the public, to the skeptics. They are very two-faced, because I do get a lot of nasty comments and nasty tweets from them. Like, I even took the time out to make a YouTube video of all the nasty comments and all of the nasty tweets I get from them, like calling me a dog and whatnot, and giving me a veiled threat, like, something like, I would be very, very worried about this white ethno-states if I were you, So they have no problem showing how nasty they could be to Black people.
Oh, by the way, Foxy Jezebel, I muted you, so if you're talking and nothing's happening.
I thought I had muted myself back before I unmuted my television, so it's fine. You did your moderating duties well, so it's cool.
It reminds me of
also, to go to Rent's point, it's like, yes, as when it comes to trying to prove that if there was a white ethno state, that crime would go down. I'm sorry, but the FBI crime stats, which folks like to go to show how bad the darkies are and how much we kill each other, white people kill each other, commit crimes and kill each other just as much as Black people do. Pretty much as much as any other ethnic group does, because, due to the segregated nature of how our cities and our states are, most ethnic groups pretty much live like near each other. And, you're not going to go outside of a comfort zone to, commit crimes against other people. You're going to commit crimes against people who live like in your vicinity, who are closest to you. And most times a white person, 9 times out of 10, lives closer to another white person, and the same for other ethnic groups. So
the way they seem to phrase it in terms of the crime statistics, when me and Kevin were talking to Mike Enoch, he'd always go back to our people. Like, these are our people. They're the same as you and me, and there is going to be problems amongst our people. But when there are problems amongst our other people, it's different, because those are problems between like them. That's the other people. So when Black people commit crimes, he can judge that fully because it's them. It's the other people. It's not my people.
I just realised, have we even mentioned the fact that I was in this hangout yet?
The Enoch hangout.
No, I was.
Oh, the other hangout. Yeah, that's right. Your meta-analysis of the fact you were there with the.
I'm actually. This is the point where you came in. So this is your grand entrance, and I had written down like, "Oh my God, thank God he's here."
Kevin came in.
I had to listen to most like, oh. So
people were saying about the Enoch one that when Kevin came in, all he did was insult Mike Enoch.
Which is good and proper. So good on you.
Like, who could blame Kevin? Like, all you did was come in and insult Mike Enoch, blah, blah, blah. Like, so?
I was like, man, if you can't take a few insults, how are you going to set up this fucking ethno state?
Well, that's what Spencer did to Sargon. That's literally like every time I heard him talk.
I want bloodshed and an authoritarian ethno state, but I won't stand for having my feelings hurt.
Well, not just that, but it wasn't true with Enoch, right? The first point I made to him was just because white people, you say you want white people to organise and stuff. That's fine. White people can organise and protect themselves. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that you naturally go to an ethno state. That's a massive leap. And he just went, oh, yeah, whatever.
Well, kind of it escalated over time. Yeah.
And he didn't fucking answer it. So what's the point?
Yeah, it escalated quickly.
Yeah.
Anyways, Chrissy.
So, yeah, and when Kevin comes in, this is the first time that anybody bothers to say ethno-states suck. Ethno-state is wrong. Like, this isn't what anybody wants that has, a mind in their head. This isn't good, and who cares? And then Millennial Woes was like, well, is Uma Thurman white? And he's like, who cares?
He's stuck on that shit, eh?
Yeah,
he just walks around every day, walks around thinking, is this person white? Is that person white? And then when somebody asks them about it, or when these guys get asked about it, they hate being asked about it, but they are obsessed with it at the same time. So it's very contradictory.
So Millennial Woes then claims it's natural to live in an ethno state because that's how we did it for thousands of years, and everything he says is wrong. So we know that now because, they're not that, like, it's so hard to talk about because race isn't necessarily a very well-defined thing, and it's not a consistently defined thing. Like, you didn't go back 2,000 years and tell the Vikings and the Gauls and the Celts and the Romans that they were all the same race, and they would look at you and say, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
Can I add something to what you're saying? Which is just that their idea of race is super elastic. So is their idea of an ethno-state. They decide ad hoc what an ethno-state is, and when they're challenged on whether it's an ethno-state, they suddenly have all these caveats and all these like, oh, it's very nuanced. But it's nuanced when it needs to be, and when it needs to be, it is an ethno-state. Like, Israel is an ethno-state. And it's like, but it's like multi-ethnic. Well, yeah, there's a lot of nuance. Well, it's like, make up your mind. Is it an ethno-state or isn't it? What's an ethno-state? How do you define that?
Yeah.
They won't define it, though.
Just like race. They can't figure out race. They can't figure out ethno-state. So how are their views?
Once they do, because once they do,
solid.
It'll make it. Yeah, once they do, if if they're actually honest about it, then folks will definitely see it for what it is. We already know what it is, and we know why they won't define it, because they're too chicken shit to just come forward with what they really with what they really want. Even though everything they say and the things that they say in their videos and everything else, they pretty much try to teeter the lines between just being like full out Steve King.
Right.
But but then when you call them on it, then it's like, oh, well, but no, I didn't necessarily say this. So they try to play like, the politician's game where they say it, but trying to use, basically trying to manipulate language, using dog whistles and things like that. They're not going to outright be like, we don't like darkies and we don't want to live anywhere near them.
And that's partial. We all know that's somewhat intentional, depending on who you're talking about, because there are all types of implications, from deplatforming to losing funding. We saw that Peter Sweeten, he just got his PayPal revoked. So there was all types of consequences for you, including the argumentative consequences. What happened when Richard Spencer says, "Okay, here's my plan. Here's what we're going to do." The next day, we're all going to come out making videos about, well, you can't do this because of that, and you can't do this because of that. And so we will, eventually we will have exposed how unfeasible all of their plans are. So by keeping them a secret, by saying, well, that's for 100 years from now, or that, or this is a philosophical conversation, or whatever obfuscation they want to use, they're better able to keep that audience cultivated, because ultimately, when you look into it, when you really start to do the research about, okay, how do you do this? You run up into every roadblock politically, socially, economically. And so, yeah, part of the reason they don't talk about what their plans are and go into specifics is definitely by design.
And Chrissy, do you have any more notes on that?
Yeah, I've got so many.
Oh, yeah, you got too many notes.
I've got, at that, to Columbia's point, Andy Worski, what happens when, the newspapers get a load of you shilling out, "Oh, thank you, I hate all Black people, for giving me $500. And now I will read this very racist message," which is completely against YouTube's terms of service. So the best case scenario is they kick your ass off, and that's the end of it. But most likely, like every other time that this has happened, they get bad publicity. Coca-Cola doesn't want to advertise, and then they make a whole bunch of new rules for everybody else who's on YouTube who didn't do anything.
And then Logan Paul sees a suicide and decides to make a video about it.
Stop.
Oh, God.
Did he actually lose his channel? Someone told me he lost his channel.
No, I don't think he lost his channel. No, I don't know. I haven't been...
No, they took him off of, I don't know, some sort of...
Oh, yeah, that's right. He lost his, some YouTube Red thing or something, right? Yeah, my bad.
Personally, sometimes I can't help but think that Andy still hasn't gotten over when he thinks the whole time when he was feeling some sort of way of being sort of friendship curved by Cheska Lee. I think that really broke him.
He had a full-on obsession. Full on. It was sick.
Just didn't know what to do with himself, didn't know what direction to take the channel. And so now he's just doing all these live streams because he's just so for attention and for validation.
Whoa, wait, there's a whole Nazi side to YouTube that I haven't capitalized on.
Mm-hmm. So right. I totally think, it's not that I don't think that he doesn't buy into certain things, because, apparently, now he says he's a race realist because of Rage After Storm. That person?
Rage After Storm?
People bullied her. Therefore, she's right about everything.
Because people bullied her off the web. Therefore, she's right, or something. Yep. And so apparently she was right. And but she's right, but treat people equally, and it's like
you guys should be off the internet so that
why isn't he a feminist now? Because I can name off the top of my head maybe like 5 or 6 feminists that I know that have been pulled off the internet.
Exactly. What about feminists who are like, I've been bullied off the internet? It's like so many people, so many feminists either deleted a video or deleted their entire channels because
I didn't realize people being mean to feminists. What the fuck?
But it's
Shock.
That being said, I'm pretty sure I've heard those guys say things like that before, being like, well, it's like friggin' Shoeonhead and Greg, being surprised, when Shoeonhead was receiving like death threats and stuff. I mean, really, you're surprised? Hello.
We're still here. We're just trying to keep quiet and talk.
Oh, sorry. My thing was being weird.
Oh, it's all right, babe.
So, right, Curiosity was there since Tim is paused.
Yeah.
Did you want to continue with Kevin's magnificent appearance?
There's nothing magnificent about my fucking appearance. What are you talking about?
Chrissy,
What about your magnificent beard? Did anyone comment on that? I mean, everyone.
Yeah, for real.
Surely people can agree. Even
maybe the
Nazis.
kids their children are probably attacking her or something.
Well, maybe we could ask Kevin since he was there. What experience of that?
Yeah, Kevin hasn't spoken much in this hangout, and it's frustrating me. Say things.
Well, I've tried, but people keep interrupting me, and I don't want to be that guy who's like, "No, fuck you, I'm talking, motherfucker." I don't want to be.
Oh, sorry, Kevin. Go on.
Go.
Okay. Well, what do you want me to say?
Well, just
do you want to talk about the whole immigration argument that you guys had? Because he brought up immigration with you.
Yeah, well, yeah. The point he was making about he said something about Britain had a what was the phrase he used? As if there is some definable biological Britishness, which isn't true. Britain has been a huge waves of immigration going all the way back to the Vikings and ever since, basically. The idea of having some sort of ethnic Britishness is fucking absurd. And he knows it, but he has to try and lie to himself, otherwise how can you justify an ethno-state in Britain? Yeah, Millennial Woes is full of shit. And not just that, but he's so far at Richard Spencer's arse, because he jumped into the debate he had with Spinosaurus King as well, David Charette. And all of a sudden, not advertised to be on, but Millennial Woes just pops up again.
Yeah, I find that shit a little bit weird, how there are certain, like, second-tier race realist people, like, Braving Bruin, and I don't know if Millennial Woes is not, like, second-tier, like, he's, like, a leader in some sense, but the way that he conducts himself on YouTube is like one of these second-tier dudes. Like, he just shows up in the background and then leaps in if it's in his favor.
And he's just a guy in a dark room, like in a basement or something. That's
right?
Yeah, I did a hangout with David Charette about all of this, which is fun and interesting. If you want to see a perspective on it, you can go and watch that. But we decided that it was so dark in his room is because he literally lives in Richard Spencer's lower colon. So,
actually, it reminds me of like David Charette was talking to, is it Charette or Charette? I don't know. He was talking to Richard Spencer, and then a lot of people were like, Tim, why don't you jump in, Tim? Because Millennial Woes came on, and then I was like commenting on it, and they were like, I'd love to see you on there, Tim. Tim, get on there, Tim. And I was like, David is handling it awesomely. He doesn't need me. He's doing a great job.
Yeah,
like, I don't need to get in there and like be like, oh no, because from my perspective, Baked Alaska, Richard Spencer, and Millennial Woes versus David was probably in David's favor, based on how it was going. So I was like, it's still at some balance. Like they need another race realist in there because.
Well, not just that, but what helped with the one with David, and he did it brilliantly. He really was superb. Was that there weren't that many voices in the room to just shout over one another, which I felt was a real problem. Trying to actually get a complete sentence to be heard was quite difficult, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't like the battle format, which is good. And you know what? I mean, people were like, "Oh, you always hate on the real race realist people," but I was like, Baked Alaska did a reasonable job for, because I'd expect them to be biased, but.
Why would people complain about you hating on race realists when their whole being is hating an entire group of people?
Because you gotta be nice.
They themselves, a softer racist. I don't need to be the harder racist.
Actually, I felt bad for Mike Enoch in our conversation too, because he was getting so so discombobulated and flustered that I was like, "Come on, guys, let's be nice to this fascist Nazi."
I would feel that, but I would feel that. He's a Nazi exterminationist piece of shit, and I hope he suffers greatly during the course of his life.
I was like, look, he may be like a rabid, hardcore racist who, Holocaust denier, anti-Semite, just psychopath, but let's not be mean.
Anti-Semite who married a Jewish woman.
But we're kind of hurting his feelings here, people.
And Tim, that was kind of when you fucked up the first time.
Oh, how do you mean?
Because or maybe you were just being sarcastic. My bad. Because sometimes, not for nothing, I think it took a while for you and Kev to sort of realize that, oh my God, I'm losing brain cells engaging with these folks. Right. And I feel dead on the inside. And I kind of feel like the one who was like, no, but baby, you don't have to feel that way. You don't even have to engage with those people. Don't do it. Stay away from the light. Stay away from the light. But I
think that often is seen as kind of like the liberal quandary kind of.
From the light. So it's like, oh God.
Because I think that I have a certain liberal streak, and part of that is like, oh, I want to hear everybody out, la-di-da, I want to be involved in the conversations. Oh, what do you have to say? Whoopee. But then you find yourself in a room with this dude who's like, everything is a Jewish conspiracy, whatever. Like, liberalism does start to fail a little bit at that point, because you're not having like a friendly, rational, sane conversation. You're talking about fucking insane shit. And I picked that up over the course of the conversation, like, oh, I came into this a bit like, oh, la-di-da, I'm a hippy-dippy liberal. But then, an hour into the conversation, I'm like, this guy's fucking
no, you're not.
Nuts,
They told us. Enoch's followers told us.
Dear God, what have I done?
Yeah, but I actually felt bad for him, because he seemed to fold so much under questioning, and he seemed so flustered, and he was just like sweating profusely, like he was falling apart from what I could see. And then my human empathy takes over, like, oh, this poor, fascist Nazi, he's having a bad time. Just give him a hug. Like, it's all right, bro. Just relax.
That is not a good. You've got to get that under control.
That's my.
That's some shit you got to get under control. You've got to when you have those moments.
Oh, come on! You don't want to see somebody like pat Mike Enoch on the head and be like, "It's all right, little buddy. Oh, it's okay.
No,
your feelings."
If you have someone like Mike Enoch on the ropes, fuck that shit.
You gotta get him down for the pin.
Do both things. Like tear out the throat, something. Like do it.
I'd like to.
Like your first name is Tim, like Timberwolf.
Did any of you guys watch? Did any of you guys watch the Philosophy Tube video about Antifa? Like it was like an hour long, but it was fantastic and. It's definitely worth a watch because
Kevin was trying to say something. I'm sorry.
I had something to add to just what Tim was saying, but you can go ahead to Kev.
No, the moment's gone. Go on. What were you saying, Mike?
He wasn't held enough as a child. He needs some restorative.
One of the points that
I'm kidding around. Okay.
One of the points that he brings up to do with fascism is that the logical endpoint of fascism is the death of anyone who opposes them. Whereas the logical endpoint of because they were talking about reforming Nazis or whatever, you can, as a person like us who has empathy or whatever, you can forgive a Nazi or whatever, and they can be brought back into the fold. But it doesn't work the other way around. They won't bring people of color or LGBT people into the fold. They won't forgive them. They will exterminate those people, and that's the difference.
I think it's more pity. I have pity for Mike Enoch. He's a sad man. Like being around him makes me feel sad for him.
Yeah, it's just if you give tolerance to that, then you allow intolerance, basically.
No, I mean,
I'm a swerve, y'all.
Set him up on a high
back
chair.
To Christiosity.
Give him a pacifier, pat him on the head, be like, "It's all right, little baby. I'll get you a safe space." All right, Chrissy.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is there isn't any difference really in terms of if I sat down and debated murdering 600 million people as opposed to I sat down and debated murdering Tim. Like if I debate that with somebody, if I sit down and have a conversation about killing Tim and murdering him,
Why
and I'm
me?
sorry to pick on you, but
okay,
because you're the you know, and
it's
if I
it's
said
my
to them-
stream, isn't it? And you're jealous. Okay, no.
that's right.
We're
But
back to the
seriously,
mutiny.
all he's doing is talking about 600 million Tims, a billion Tims that he wants to kill.
That's too many Tims.
Right. 6 million Tims.
That's too many Tims.
But it is. It's plotting the murder of human beings. And that's what ends up happening. And these are all people. These are people who have lives and dreams and children, and they're American citizens, and they have everything that we have. And we're sitting here and talking about this as if we're not talking about murdering people.
But they don't
murdering
see
innocent people.
They don't see those
But we
people
are.
as high quality, awesome, amazing, incredible people like Tim. They see them as like shitty, garbage, worthless, just.
But I see
And you have
that.
to.
Like,
Right.
I see that. And when I sit down,
Dehumanized.
I sit there and I say, okay, we're having a conversation about this because you're forcing me. In a way, you're making me do this conversation because somebody has to do it. Somebody has to say, screw this. This is terrible. And screw you for having this conversation in the first place. But somebody's got to do it, right? And, you know, and Kevin and Tim are the people who are sort of doing it. But when I'm in there, I don't forget that, you know, and I don't,
Right.
and I'm not going to feel bad about Mike Enoch, who's planning to kill my friends and drag them out of their country and murder people and murder me because I'm going too. Like,
Well, I also
which of
think.
us is
Yeah, I think
surviving?
the only way it would be okay to hug someone like Mark Enoch would be to hug his face with the sole of your boot, frankly.
But okay, I talked about it in my like post conversation reflections, but I definitely feel that like my perception of what the conversation is a lot different than what the audience sees. So what I was seeing was like this pathetic, you know, sweaty dude who was just falling apart at just the lightest breeze and just feeling like I feel bad for this dude because he's
Are
obviously
you talking about me now?
not you, no, Mike Enoch. And then what the audience sees is like he still got out all of his garbage points, and his garbage points really appeal to me because I'm, you know, because they're a racist sack of crap who's a fan of that guy. And then a bunch of other people saying Tim is going on a stream with this, you know, exterminationist, psychotic, anti-Semitic dude, and he seems to be treating him, you know, kind of nicely. But, you know, from my perspective, it's more like I feel sad for this guy. This guy's pathetic. He can't fucking answer anything. And so I just have a different perception of what I'm doing versus what the audience is seeing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to say like you're bad. I'm just saying I think that that's a thing that you have to sort of take into account now.
Oh, no,
'Cause
I
yes, he
understand that
was a,
perspective. You know, a lot
he
of
was
people are very
a
defensive.
hot mess, right? Like he was barely keeping it together at all.
He was a
hardly
hot
making any
Nazi.
sense.
I know from my perspective, I was like,
Well,
everything, you know.
A not hot that way, like just a hot mess. Just
And also,
like,
you know,
what is going
Sargon
on
wasn't calm. And in Sargon's debate, he was, you know, hot under the collar, and everyone was like, Sargon got triggered. Sargon, you know, he's falling apart. Like, Sargon can't handle anything. But when it was Mike Enoch, they were like, Mike Enoch crushed. He destroyed the communists. He's a hero. And I was like, he seemed more flustered than Sargon. But why does he get a pass?
Because
these people don't have a brain cell between them.
But I think it's because they want Mike Enoch to win, because they agree with his bullshit racism.
This is the thing, right? All the people on the alt-right, before they even go into the debate, didn't matter what happened, they were always going to say, oh, Mark Enoch crushed it. He defeated the communists, even though none of us are communists. Like they've got their script already written before it happens. So
My
fuck 'em.
perspective wasn't that. It was like, this guy is falling apart. Anyways, okay. Chrissy, did we finish with your notes?
No, I'm so
God.
sorry. So after the whole whether or not there's genetic coherence to the British Isles, right, which is nonsense, V joins in because, they hadn't maxed out on the stupidity yet, so we needed more. Spencer...
Well, Spencer had brought his little gimp creature in the form of millennial woes, so Sargon was just bringing his,
That's true. So GIMP is ableist, but I'm going to let it go. All right. Spencer's aware that most people, says he's aware that most people don't want an ethno-state because they're not political or idealistic, but it's the visionaries who make history, not most people. And then JF asks Sargon if he'd be willing with to have an ethno-state on Antarctica, and Sargon says yes, because he doesn't have actual principles that say ethno-states suck. So then V is asking him what happens if there's an oppressive government within the ethno-state, like a hereditary aristocracy, and Spencer says those are good. He believes in heredity and that some people are born to rule. Hierarchies are totally natural, and the real question is who is ruling and for what purpose. Sargon also likes hierarchies, but he wants them to be meritocracies, and Spencer's like, your child. And so they argue about that for a bit. And then the stupidest argument I've ever been made to sit through happens because Carl asks Spencer if, as the king of Antarctica, like, what if there was a Jewish cabal that was trying to get through to your people? And, what would you do through the internet? And would this be censorship and it's a bad thing? And then Kevin comes in and starts to get somewhere with this stupid, all right, so this king that's born to rule is a despot. And he wants to imprison you, Richard Spencer, because he's got the power to do it because he's born to rule and you've let him have the power to do it. So what are you going to do about it? And at that point, JF rushes in to say, these are severe logical fallacies. You must not answer. I don't know. I can't do French. But, he's like this prissy defense lawyer, like, don't answer that, Spencer.
It's
because it's an
a lot
actual
of
question.
straw manning going on about Richard Spencer. I can't do French either, can I?
You silly English kniggets. you and your waving around nigget things.
It's about love, you idiot. You idiot. It's love. Sorry. That's a reference to.
It's the law.
Delightful amounts of race, casual racism now. It's genius.
It's because the French aren't a real race. They're just the French.
Is it still racist if you get the accent completely wrong because you can't do it properly?
Sacre bleu.
Then it's racist against somebody else
cheese.
that doesn't exist.
I was just copying
It's
Monty Python.
Frankist.
Anyone notes?
I'll wave my private parts at you.
And then the half hour came to an end, and I was like, "Oh, thank you." And that was it.
Thank the sweet release of death.
Right.
Haven't heard from Chris.
Yeah,
in a while.
I had to cry a little bit because the first I watched for like 2 minutes, and the amount of shit that came out of Richard Spencer's mouth was just, I was like, how do you even, like someone was saying this earlier in the hangout, they can say like one sentence and it can take half an hour to deconstruct the bullshit that they spin in just like a single sentence. It's monumental.
So are we all aware as well that there is going to be Sargon versus Spencer Part 2 coming up?
Oh, God.
Yeah. I ain't watching it.
Is it on Warski's channel?
I think it probably will be. And it's quite strange because I think Sargon is like, this, I have to have another go of it so that I can show that the liberalist movement is where it's at. And I guess he didn't feel like he did too good in the first one, so he wants to do it again. Like, do people think that it's going to be, good for him?
No, he can't debate. He shut the fuck up.
Well, is he going to have a new strategy or something, or a new... way of approaching it.
If I were Spencer, I would.
He's just going to try to save face.
If I were Spencer, I would try to do little digs at his ego, because that really does seem to trip him up. So that would be one of the tactics that I would use in round 2, after watching how he reacted in round 1.
Right.
Yeah, even Sargon.
I would say
he failed. I mean, he did a really horrible, terrible job. He was just so flustered, and all he did was just laugh at everything. He did a horrible job.
Yeah, it wasn't really even a debate. Like, whenever I heard Sargon and Spencer talking, Sargon would say a thing, and then Spencer would be like, "Oh, that's stupid. Shut up, Sargon. Stop being autistic," or whatever. You know, there was no, you know, Spencer would just talk a whole bunch, and then Sargon would say something, and Spencer would just kind of laugh it off, and then it would continue. And it was like, this isn't a debate. This is just Spencer proselytizing.
A classic problem Sargon has is that when he is given the opportunity to make a convincing argument, he often just uses it as an opportunity. Sorry, Michael, can you mute yourself? He uses it as an opportunity to ask the question back to the person. So he'll say, well, what do you think of X? And he'll say, well, what do you think of X? And so he's just handed his time back to his debate opponent. And he does this all the time. And the other thing, of course, that he does is they'll start to talk, and he'll give them a sentence or two, and then he'll talk over them. And as a consequence, you can't hear what the other person says. And when they finish their point, he just keeps talking. So it's the way his discussion style is, he doesn't actually set himself up to be able to make a coherent point. That's where he operates, is in rhetoric, not in argumentation.
Okay, so have we covered the entire hangout now?
No, because I still have to go.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. So we are at 3 hours, and we're from 3 hours to 3:30, and really this is when the stream is starting to wind down. So they get into a discussion towards the end of hour 2 about freedom of speech and freedom, and whether or not the ethno-state is tyrannous, and everybody really starts to talk over each other, so it's very hard to sort of understand what they're even talking about. But Millennial Woes goes on a tangent and begins to talk about how Ashkenazi Jews and Asians are going to overtake white people. He doesn't go into specifics. And he then talks about how Hispanic people and Black people and Muslims, quote unquote, are going to outnumber them, and how that will destroy the white race, and what Sargon intends to do about that. The interesting part of that for me was the presupposition that being outnumbered, or being what overtaken means no one knows, but being outnumbered means that suddenly you are going to be doomed. It presupposes that brown people being in the majority is going to destroy white people, and he seems not to understand that there have always been more people of color on the planet than there have been white people. You have technically always been outnumbered. Millennial Woes is very angry at Sargon because Sargon says, he doesn't care, that doesn't matter to him. And Millennial Woes retorts with, and Millennial Woes and Richard Spencer retort with, well, you're talking about, we're talking about the survival of white people. White people, I mean, from what I know, white people don't necessarily need to be the majority of the population anywhere to survive. It's really, all of this is kind of based on this faulty premise as well, that IQ equals us over being that equals white people being overtaken. That I don't know how that's the case. When there are certain.
So I was just going to say, just in.
Oh, go ahead, sweetheart.
Yeah, I think it's a point that occurred to me during the thing, but I didn't get a chance to actually mention it. Was they think that non-white people becoming the majority is bad for white people, because they think that those non-white people are going to treat the white people as badly as they have treated others when they've had the opportunity to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
And from what we've seen
there's no evidence to suggest that's actually going to happen. They just assume that, all people are the hideous monsters that colonial white folk have been.
And I hate to agree with Sargon. I'm going to sound like a total like she-cuck in this.
Oh, how dare you? No.
But Sargon, right? But Sargon does actually make that point of, well, you're just assuming that these people are going to be terrible to us, and I don't think that's the case. And I was shocked, and I'm still shocked to this very moment. There's no way that IQ in and of itself, because he says Ashkenazi Jews and Asians, alluding to the idea that their higher IQs will mean that they will take over or overtake white people. But what he ignores is the fact that in order to overtake the West, it's going to take a lot of different inputs. So I don't know if you guys know, the predictions are that within the next 2 decades, China is going to become the world's leader in GDP. They'll overtake the United States. But that's not a matter of IQ. That's a matter of their economic growth. That's a matter of their capital. That's a matter of factors that are way outside race or IQ. So you kind of, you have millennial woes talking about this like IQ is the only determinant in whether or not the West will survive.
Let's also not forget that IQ is absolutely bullshit. So.
Yeah, and that presuppose, and I'm even ceding the ground that IQ is an accurate measure of intelligence, which is highly debatable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think like IQ is a measure of something. I don't know if it's absolutely bullshit, but it's certainly not the measure of intelligence.
It's a measure of your ability to pass tests. It's a measure of education, not of intelligence.
And also, it tests a lot of like spatial awareness, right? Like, pattern recognition. And if pattern recognition is the be all and end all of intelligence, and I guess it's the greatest.
Basically, and this goes, they found a metric by which they can claim that white people are superior. The fact that it's bollocks means nothing. You could do it if white people were on average an inch taller than everyone else. They'd say, oh, look, therefore we're brilliant because we're an inch closer to God or some shit. They've found a way.
Right. Well, it's how they use IQ, because I'd say IQ measures something and maybe it could tell you a few things, but they go way beyond what we know.
They use it as a superiority thing. We're like,
right. They use it similar to the way that people were using phrenology.
It's 2 layers of bullshit though, because it's.
Like I've seen them argue that if somebody can drive a car, then this is a little bit of a tangent, but if someone can drive a car, they can consent to sex. That kind of logic. It's like, wait a minute, how is driving a car? And what? No,
it's a way of incredibly pathetic people who've got very little going for them to make themselves feel good. That's what.
It's just a matter of how they read into these things. I think IQ again measures something, but that's about all we can really say.
Yeah, but it's 2 layers as well, because you have.
The people who make this argument are often not exactly the most high IQ people themselves. So I'm really not sure how serious to take it. But
maybe they're intelligent in other ways, Kevin.
I'm sure they could. Yeah, Tim, I'm sure they could put up shelves without injuring themselves.
They could probably tie their shoelaces, maybe.
No, you're not. We're not going to laugh at the shelf in the face joke. No.
Yeah, that was.
God, you son of a bitch! I was assaulted by myself. So.
Are you telling me that you took a shelfie?
Oh, that hurts.
Anyway, back to TheLadyColumbia.
If you're attacked by
I wasn't done.
Does that count as domestic abuse? No.
Yep. But
all right.
So
he's obviously got a bad IQ.
Force through, guys.
Okay, that's good.
You tried it and it didn't work. You tried it. You're gonna need more people.
He's got a low IQ.
Mute yourself.
For real.
Mute yourself. Delete your account.
I want to say something, so I'm going to interject on behalf.
The problem with the whole IQ argument is like they love to talk about high IQ and race, but yet if they do have high IQ, they do nothing with it. All they do is just complain over the internet. They're not doctors, they're not lawyers, they're not politicians, they're not astrophysicists or anything. I mean, what would be the points of having a high IQ if you do nothing but complain on Twitter all day, living in your mother's basement?
But I am a biologist. Okay, sorry.
Not to mention that again, they're going off of pseudoscientific bullshit that has been debunked for decades.
Thank you.
Let's not forget that.
Remember that race realism is just scientific racism in the 21st century. It's
That's
just phrenology,
pretty much
babies.
Oh, somebody took issue with saying scientific racism because it assumes science.
I'm surprised someone didn't bring up Charles Murray and the bell curve while they were talking, even though they might as well have, since they were talking about IQ and shit.
Yes.
Like,
I said race realism.
let's not get it twisted.
Sorry, I said scientific racism.
Ideas.
Somebody said, "Why do you call it scientific?" And I was like, "Oh, good point."
Because the reason is because people are trying to obfuscate their personal biases and via science, and it was done.
Pseudoscientific.
Remember, eugenics, like phrenology and eugenics used to be a thing. Like Germany,
and they used to be considered science.
Hitler got the whole eugenics thing from us because we brought it over. We brought eugenics over to Europe, and Hitler just did fucking 720 with it.
Another term to look out for, by the way, is they've started to use is human biodiversity, or HBD, which is essentially the exact same thing. It's rebranding of scientific racialism.
It sounds like a sexually transmitted disease.
Yeah.
HBD.
They're trying to move to more and more like harmless sounding terms that actually.
They always soften their language. I'm going to power through.
Go.
Yeah, they're trying to use language to normalize. Yeah, they're trying to use they're manipulating language to make their bullshit sound palatable to the masses. That's all.
All right, we're powering through, and then I'm done. I swear.
Okay.
Got lost in my notes here. Millennial. Okay, so Sargon retorts that to Millennial Woes about he brings back the point of, well, what you're talking about, you're advocating for a tyranny while you're assuming the worst possible.
No, that's
that's not good. I'm gonna power through.
So close to the end.
Oh no. Yeah, this has been quite an epic hangout, hasn't it?
Quite.
Yeah.
Maybe Kevin can pick up the story. Or Christiosity.
I wanted to offer the alternative point of view, the idea that oh no, she's back.
Let's repower. Power part 2.
All right. Powering through. Okay. So starting from the top, Sargon is retorting to Millennial Woes that he believes in tyranny and that he believes the worst possible conclusions for what would happen when the non-white people outnumber white people. Millennial Woes retorts that it's not tyranny because they'd be paying them to leave. V interjects that yes, it is tyranny. Millennial Woes retorts that Sargon is hysterical. And then the conversation sort of breaks off and they begin to talk about cultural identity. So V questions Richard Spencer and asks, well, okay, you have these white people who are really into like anime and like certain aspects of Japanese culture. Does that hurt white identity? And Richard Spencer retorts by mocking him and says, no, according to the lefties, white nationalists are into anime, so it's fine. And no, Richard Spencer says something about elective affinity, that there are hollow aspects of our identity that have lost us a sense of regionalness, but that there are aspects of us that we share with other people that are fine. I kind of lost him at that point, what the fuck he was talking about. Andy Worski, and so after that, Andy Worski breaks in to talk about that he's going to pay his guest. Kevin, I wanted to ask you if you got your Andy Worski check.
Yeah, I did, and I put it out, and just a shout out to Antisocial Media, who came up with the initial idea. But if you go to my Twitter feed, it's the pinned tweet at the top. You have 4 choices. I've got 4 Jewish charities where that Nazi fucking money is going to, and you can vote on where that those dollars are going to go to. So I thought that would be a great way of doing something good and pissing them off. So, yay.
Awesome. And basically, everyone of note leaves after that, and it's basically boils down to Dr. Race Realism, as I call him, and Andy Worski talking, and they don't really talk about anything of consequence, so I didn't think it was really worth getting into.
Well, you should really refer to him as Dr. Runaway Rapist, who's avoiding justice in America.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, we all have our Dr. Race Realism for his ass, but that was about it. The only thing I'm going to say as comment, I think I've pretty much already said, but why would China or Japan want to topple white people when it's those white people who provide millions of dollars in trade and foreign direct investment? Why would South Korea want to topple one of, if not the largest market for its goods? They wouldn't. They too seem to forget that the United States and the Western world provide great military assistance for all these people worried about overtaking, for all these people who they are worried about overtaking and outnumbering them. And yeah.
Boom.
That's pretty much all I had to say.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
So basically, you're saying that these folks really have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, and they're just pulling things out their ass. They don't understand the geopolitical implications of what they're saying, because the moment you attempt to enact this, Russia is going to call for sanctions against the United States. The moment, because they are our rival politically, and this has actually happened before. Russia has, since the Soviet Union, been using Black people as a political football for the United States, saying that you can't tell us how to conduct human rights if you don't treat your Black people well. In fact, that was one of the impetuses to pass the 1964 and the 1965 Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, respectively. And yeah,
Vladimir, to this day, Vladimir Putin used it very recently.
Throw that in our face, yeah, which is weird.
Right. Well, it's a sticking point of division. What we did in the past was try to create a greater integration. Now it's a divisive point between us. Ultimately, they don't understand that we have people who rival our power in the Western world, and they will use that as an opportunity to diminish our power. And they would diminish our soft power, our ability to influence other nations, when they call for the ethno-state. If they got a politician into office calling for this thing, they would diminish our soft power greatly within a week. Right? Yeah. They would have one of the... Go ahead.
Yeah, that was one of Styx's points. He says that if you try to create white ethno-states, then it would help China become the number one power, because it would, dismantle the United States. I mean, it would be a great win for enemy nations. It would be the best win an enemy nation could ever have, because the United States that badly.
That's going to happen anyway. China's going to take over within our lifetimes. So I don't see that's a. I mean, one ethno-state would hasten that problem, but it's the American empire is crumbling, and China's going to take over.
China will overtake us economically, but at this point, no one. Sorry, guys, I'm extremely hungry. No one is yet to touch our military power. That's the last vestige of our true post-World War II strength in the world. And our soft power. We have what China doesn't have is the cultural influence that the United States possesses. And in truth, that is what white nationalists, white identitarians really want. They talk about, we don't want the United States to be too hard. They want the United States because they recognize that if the United States got to the point where the ethno-state was super popular, they could export that idea to other parts of Europe and the European diaspora easily on the backs of our ability to just influence other countries. So we still have vestiges of power that are difficult for other people to touch. Mind you, the election of Trump and the way that the Republican Party has been conducting itself has diminished some of that. But we are still very much a powerful nation. And you'd be a fool to think that these people didn't want all of the benefits of the United States as one of the world's most powerful, as one of the world's most powerful nations. But basically they want all of those benefits to themselves, right? They don't want.
So it's not right. that they want an ethno status, that they want to take America and turn it into an ethno state, right?
Yeah. The way that
take Florida.
So, I mean, you can't. So
Just
I mean,
go,
you know,
take
if it was just that they wanted an ethno state and that was voluntary, surely they could just go somewhere where no one else was and have their ethno state. And they, you know, I mean, all the reasons they have to justify it seem irrelevant.
Yeah, Mars is free. If Mars is free, if they want to stop up there.
I would pitch. Start up the GoFundMe now. We could send them all to Mars. I'm good with that.
In theory,
all the justifications they have for it just seem irrelevant. When you think that it's not that they want an ethno state, it's that they want America, and they have no right to it.
Well, they're annoyed that white people don't run 100%. They only run 99% of everything. That's what they're annoyed about ultimately.
What they don't go ahead, Tim.
I mean, it was brought up near the start of the hangout, but I just think it's hilarious when Sargon is like, "Oh, so black people could have Florida," and then Richard Spencer's like, "Yeah, sure." It's like, is that how it works? You just like, sure, you can just have Florida. It's that easy. Just like, yeah, you can have this. I want this state. All right, take Utah. Go ahead.
There's this guy with 500,000 followers on YouTube, and a racist said that they can have Florida.
Gave away Florida. You know, you're just haggling states. You can have this state. You can have this. It's like Pokemon cards or something.
Why didn't they choose fewer people? You're not going to have to move that many people if you choose Montana.
Do the crocodiles get to stay, or do you get rid of the crocodiles? No.
Well, in theory, see, if these people were serious, you would know that they were serious about what they're talking about, because they would be buying land in places like Idaho, where the population is like 99% white, or in Wyoming. They would be buying land there, and they would be moving there. Because what you could do in theory is, you can buy up a bunch of land. You can work that land. As long as you pay property taxes, the United States doesn't really care what you do. You can take over the elected government there, and start a real ethno state, right? They could have taken the $20,000 that they gave to Andy Worski and bought a nice piece of land in Idaho and been a step closer to that.
Amish based on race.
No, seriously, I have to interject.
Go, Chrissy.
The crocodile. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Because they've been trying. They have been trying. And Richard Spencer bought up some stuff in Whitefish, Montana. He decided to go with his family and his mother. And it was sort of a disaster for him because Whitefish, Montana said, "Get the fuck out of here. We want nothing to do with you." But there are people who have been buying up. There are groups that have been buying up land and money in some of these northern, very low population states.
Good. I would have expected nothing less. That means that their plans are predictable. These aren't plans that are coming out of nowhere. This isn't some brilliant visionary. We can see what they're going to do, and we can stop them in the initial stages.
Well, surely if the fact that the town of Whitefish has turned Richard Spencer down, surely that makes them anti-white fish. Come on now.
Doesn't it make them blackfish?
I got cut off briefly there, but Tim mentioned about would the crocodiles be allowed to stay in Florida? And surely they would, because their lineage goes back even before humans existed. They've been around.
That's true. Yeah.
Come on now.
They have the greatest claim to it. Okay, so
Tim was saying about like the Amish and stuff. What's the deal? You know?
Yeah, they'll be like the Amish, except instead of being anti-technology, they'll just be anti anyone who's not white.
Well, my idea was that they would start a communist state. In my thinking, you would have to have something close to communism in order to perpetuate. Right,
It's
in
race
order to
communism.
perpetuate the initial ethno-state. Well, it's better than it's more that's better defined than Sargon's gender communism. What the fuck that means?
Gender communists. I'd never
For the
heard of that
win.
before.
I'm a
gender communist.
polymorphic plural being. Don't y'all play with me.
So I think we've covered the entire thing, right?
I'm done, y'all. I can't do no more. Y'all white people are working me to death. As usual.
So this has been
You guys are super smart. Like it's been really cool, like sitting here and listening to your talk, because you are very smart people. So thanks for
the IQ. If you
Thank
end up
you
the
for
IQ in
bringing-
this
Aw,
room,
thank you, dear.
And thank you, Michael, for bringing us, even though he wasn't on screen for very long, some seagull nonsense. I saw a lot of camera.
I think it's
I can,
basically Mensa around here.
yeah. I can give you some more seagulls if you like. Here they are. Oh, look.
Yes. Seagull me, bro.
There's a oh no, that's my face.
Lock the screen.
Okay, so this has been a very.
There he is.
Oh, there is a seagull.
Seagull.
Yes.
He's white and black.
Seagull.
There he
Don't
is.
talk. Lock the screen on
Ah!
Michael's camera.
Oh, whoops! I got to click on Michael. So we're seeing
That's
what's
a-
happening in the field on the ground
That is a
No, we're
pure
only seeing
white
you, Tim.
seagull.
Can you
Things
click
are really
on
getting out of
Michael
control.
again?
New Zealand.
I clicked on him.
Things are
There we go.
Oh no, he's got
That's
a
the
black
white-
tail. Oh, he's a multi-racial pigeon. No,
it's a
seagull.
white seagull state.
I already made that joke.
He's a bi-ethnic seagull. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah, I was gonna
god.
be-
He's gonna get killed in the ethno state.
Okay, so we're going to round up this conversation.
Imagination. Evil,
If that's
obviously.
allowed.
Jump.
We could stay here forever.
Are you?
look at seagulls.
No, we're not going to stay here forever with seagull communism. I don't have all day for seagull
We can
communism.
go for another hour if you guys want. Like, what do you think?
No. Sorry.
No, baby, I got stuff to do. Love y'all, but I got.
Somebody
Right.
I have to.
I have something to say though. I want to tell anybody,
Chris,
out there, that we have a better way.
Ruining this.
All right,
Here we go.
you don't have to like do this bull cannoli. I'm sorry, my kids started coming down the stairs, so I can't. No, it's bull cannoli with the white ethno state, because
Well,
it's going to be a
Sorry.
better.
Sorry to
Cool.
interrupt you, but I think we can all do like some closing statements, and so you can do your closing statement, and then
Right,
just like if everyone's got a final thought. How does that sound, everybody?
Yeah.
that works.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So,
Fantastic.
sorry to cut you off, Chrissy. But yeah, just to put that idea out there. So, Chrissy, yeah, you can do your thoughts.
Look, so you have people like Spencer who are like all about whiteness and the ethno state. I've been white all my life. It's not that awesome. So forget that. And then you have centrists who have a very diverse range of opinions. But then you have us who say, we want everybody to live together and be happy. And we don't care that you have melanin or less melanin in your skin. And we want a good world where people have justice and where human beings are human beings. So please don't listen to these garbage people. You know, come here, listen to us. We don't believe that white people or black people or any other people are intrinsically by birth, anything. They're just intrinsically a little more pale or a little less pale or a little more dark or a little less dark. And I'm probably babbling now. But seriously, I'm sick of hearing about this crap. I'm sick of hearing all these racist bullshit people who are saying racist bullshit things as if it was real, as if it was true. It isn't true. It's all crap.
Excellent work by Chrissy. So next, Foxy.
But where's your evidence, Chris? Let's be honest. Where's your logic and reasons?
Wow, your voice got a hell of a lot deeper. Foxy. Jesus.
Oh boy.
Michael, oh, that's my turn.
I could just sit back and watch Mike and Crazy House. There you go, because Mike just started some stuff right there.
I would still also vote for putting Michael's screen on lock, because if we can all watch the seagulls while we listen to
I
everybody.
have. It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was waiting for Mike and the Seagulls to scream, "Citation, please."
Citation needed.
We're watching the seagull.
By the way, Michael, Mike and the Seagulls is a great name for a band if you ever start one. So.
Mike and the Seagulls.
It is.
Anyway,
I'm starting Troll Seagull Twitter tonight.
Foxy time. Foxy.
Basically, let's see. How can I end this? I just wish that more folks would just, for all the hyper skepticism that's shown for, when anyone brings up social justice points or feminist points, and you really don't see any of that from the skeptic side when it comes to questioning, when it comes to these issues of, race and IQ and all these other scientific racist nonsense. So I believe that people deserve a better skeptic community. Maybe we're the only real skeptics left. And I'm fine with that. I just really think from here on in, maybe it'd be just a better idea to just sort of do more streams like this, or maybe not, or even if we just do more content on our own channels breaking down why this stuff is bullshit. I think that would be a better use of our time, for one, and we would be better able to control the flow of bullshit, or stop it, as much as possible from reaching impressionable people. So yeah, that's just what I have to say.
Good comments. Very nice. Now, Kevin Logan. Bump, 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 bump. Bump, bump. Where is he?
Hello?
Kevin, you gonna get skipped.
Kevin's. I was like, it's Kevin Logan's turn, and it's not.
Yeah, sorry, no.
They're like, Kevin, you're gonna get skipped.
Yeah, no, I'm
real?
happy for it to be skipped, because everyone said what I wanted to say, and I want this to fucking end now. So I'll carry on as you were.
All right, good comments by Kevin.
Love you, Kevin.
Okay, love you, Kevin. Go ahead, Columbia.
No, Christy was next on my screen. I was just going.
Oh, Christy, let Christy go. Let Christy go.
Go ahead, Christy.
All right. Well, I too it's latest for me. So I want to just echo, I think this has been a really good conversation. A lot of interesting points have come out. And the thing that I want to just sort of note going forward is that it seems to me, in terms of YouTube dynamics, where the alt-right are right now is that they are trying to absorb as much of the former skeptic community as possible. And that's something that we should be watching for, because, they've been on more platforms now, and there has been more interaction than before. And yeah, I can't really predict where it's going to go from here, but certainly this conversation is starting on YouTube more, or at least escalating, and I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Okay, LadyColumbia.
Okay, so I'm a speechify what everybody else has said. We as a community need to be more communal. This conversation was awesome, and I think we need to have more of them. We need to be penetrating their spaces more. So when they have debates, we need to invite ourselves and insist on going. We need to make sure that our biggest figures, the people who are the most visible of our groups, are going to these debates, are representing our side, and are fighting as hard as we are. And I think that, frankly, be inculcating people, trying not to insult as many people, you know, leaving out certain words, being better with the way that we present visuals, and doing as much as we can to ensure that we are attempting to gain ground. Sometimes you have to ignore what your enemies or what your rivals are doing in order to focus on yourselves. And I think that right now is the most important. We need to be making the content. We need to be doing what we can do to ensure that we are transmitting, we are getting to as many people as is humanly possible. And I think this conversation is the start of something that can help with that. And I want to thank you guys. You guys have been awesome, and I love you all. Mwah.
Excellent. Okay, Michael.
Yeah, g'day, mate. So this is Michael here on the beach with a fucking seagull. He's going for a bit of a stroll down the beach. He's going to go and attack some of his rivals over there. He's spreading his wings real well. I think that people just need to. I'd echo what someone said earlier about the hyper skepticalness that comes when we're talking about social justice or whatever, that just isn't applied when it comes to people like Richard Spencer and their ideas, which just are absolutely ridiculous and have no scientific merit or basis in reality. Like all I had to do was watch him talk for half an hour, and that was hard. But all you need to do is apply a little bit of skepticism to that, a little bit of thinking, do a little bit of research. And all it comes down to is racist people trying to justify their racist ideas with just grabbing at straws, and it's ridiculous, it's unscientific, and it's just a hateful, illogical ideology, and I don't understand why it's getting so much, and it is getting a lot of airtime, unfortunately. And like the others have said, I think it's probably not going away anytime soon. So I'm not really sure what to do about that, but I mean, people need to listen to you guys. I was very happy to sit and listen to you guys talk all day, because you're all very smart people. You've all got some great ideas, and yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, Michael.
So thanks.
Okay,
that's all right, mate.
Second to finally, Ren.
Yes, I agree with the points that Curiosity made earlier. I would also like to live in a world where everybody belongs. I believe that everybody should be included. Blacks, gays, Jews. It would be nice if skin color could be treated like eye color or hair color. I think the whole, treating people differently based on their skin color or tries to kick them out of the country is really silly. But after the live stream being like the number one thing on trending, I don't think the topic is going to go away anytime soon. I think it's better to just try to be persuasive and to improve communication skills and to better just go after them. That's my thoughts on it.
All right, very nice. So we've been through everything. I guess for my final comment, one thing that I thought about near the start of the stream but didn't get around to saying was just the conversation about pragmatism and practicality versus philosophy and ideals and all of these aspirations. And that seemed to be a big point of contention between Richard Spencer and Sargon talking about first principles and talking about ideals and philosophy, and Spencer talking about practicality despite having none, so it didn't really make any sense. And I think on the grounds of like practicality and pragmatism versus philosophy and ideals, that progressives do actually have the edge, because we care the most, I think, about practicality and pragmatism. We care about policies and how things impact people's lives, and that's why so much of this conversation was about how things actually do really work, not in terms of like how they work in Richard Spencer's fantastical racial lens, or how they work in terms of like John Locke and these first principles, which are useful but can't be 100% entirely applied to today, because today's environment is changing and shifting. I think the conversation we had showed that we do have more of a kind of like practical, pragmatic viewpoint in terms of what actually impacts people in the real world. And I think, and on that level, I think progressives have the advantage. And I guess we'll just see how this debate continues going forwards, and we'll see how Sargon versus Spencer Part 2 goes, and we'll just see how all of this developed. But I think it's good to have like a more grounded conversation about this topic, because that's not really going on YouTube. So that would be my final comments there.
I better get my money from this live stream.
I will split up the money between all 7 billion participants.
For real?
And
Can I also make a correction for people who are complaining in the chat?
About-
That so a little factoid: people in Europe, right through the Tudor times when the European countries were going out, they didn't wash. They didn't wash themselves in terms of immersion in water and using soap to clean their bodies, because they were influenced by the writing of the Greek text, that they had the idea that it would bring the balances of your humors out of order or out of whack, and so they did like dry rubs and stuff like that. But in terms of actual like getting in a shower every day and washing themselves, that was like not something they would consider healthy in those times. And so for some people who seem to be a bit confused about hygiene practices of Europeans who were coming over to the New World, those are the facts.
I think it's good to end on just a totally random factoid like that. So
yeah, no
Kristen.
worries.
All right, everybody. I've been to Motivator Opinion. You've been awesome. Pip, pip.
Hey, wait a minute.
I don't know what else you guys say. I don't want to. What does Michael say? I'm Michael. No, I don't know what you say.
This is Big Chrissy Alfie, and you know you liked it. So say that.
I'm the Lady Columbia. I'll be seeing you soon. Good night, good morning, good afternoon.
All right.
I've been
Thanks,
Christy.
folks.
You've been awesome. Have a good one.
Bye.
On a bloody seagull, mate.